From the silent snow forests of Finland, where the White Death waited unseen to the sun, baked palm ridges of Iraq, where the Sheikh of snipers guarded his people. This is a calm, yet gripping journey that we're about to embark on, lasting over 3 relaxing hours. We'll begin with how one farmer tucked snow in his mouth to hide every breath, and move deeper into how a 60-year-old marksman found steady aim under desert heat. So put your phone or television remote to the side, dim the lights, and please make sure to like the video, subscribe, and let me know where you are listening from in the comments. Now, let's begin. The White Death. SIMO HÄYHÄ. The forest of Karelia holds its breath. Winter, 1939, minus 30 degrees Celsius and dropping. The kind of cold that turns exhaled breath into tiny crystals that hang in the air like frozen ghosts. The kind of cold that makes rifle bolts stick and men's thoughts turn sluggish. But not his thoughts, never his. The man lies perfectly still in the snow, a white phantom against white ground, so still you might mistake him for another drift, another fold in winter's blank page. Finnish soldier SIMO HÄYHÄ doesn't move for hours at a time. He has mastered the art of becoming the landscape itself. The Russians advancing through these woods call him Belaya Smrt, the White Death, though they never see him. Not until it's too late. Born to farmers in the rural municipality of Rautjärvi, HÄYHÄ grew up where patience wasn't a virtue but a necessity. As a boy, he would wake before dawn, rifle in hand, tracking game through these same forests. His father taught him to hunt with iron sights rather than telescopic ones, a skill that would later prove devastatingly effective. The scope brings your eye too close to the rifle, he once explained in a rare interview, his voice soft as falling snow. It fogs in the cold, it catches sunlight, and it lifts your head just enough to get it shot off. When Soviet forces poured across the border in November 1939, HÄYHÄ was already 33, a seasoned farmhand and hunter with nothing remarkable about him save his marksmanship. He stood just 5 feet 3 inches tall, compact enough to present the smallest possible target in the snow. His rifle was nothing special either. A Finnish-produced variant of the Mosin Nagant that he'd used since his youth. What set him apart was a methodical precision born from thousands of hours in these forests. The Soviets brought 450, 0 men against Finland's 300, 0. They brought tanks and planes and the certainty of quick victory. They did not account for men like HÄYHÄ, who understood that warfare in these conditions was primarily a battle against nature itself. He dressed entirely in white, packed his mouth with snow to prevent his breath from giving away his position, and chose his hiding spots with the instinctive knowledge of someone who could read the land like a book. During one particularly brutal week in February 1940, when temperatures plunged to 40 below zero, HÄYHÄ recorded his highest tallies. Soviet troops, suffering from frostbite and inadequate winter equipment, followed the paths of least resistance through the forest. HÄYHÄ knew where they would appear before they did. He would set up before dawn, sometimes burying himself in snow for hours, the cold seeping into his bones, becoming one with the silence. Then a single shot, a body falling and nothing. No follow-up, no movement, just the forest reclaiming its quiet. "I did nothing special," he would later say. "I did what I was told as well as I could." This understatement belies the psychological impact he had on Soviet forces. Entire battalions would halt their advance when a single shot rang out and a man fell. They knew the White Death was watching. They knew his shots could come from anywhere, 400, 500, sometimes 600 meters away, with deadly accuracy. His preferred time was early morning, when the weak winter sun cast long shadows through the trees but hadn't yet melted the night's snow. His preferred distance was under 150 meters, close enough for certainty with iron sights, far enough to disappear into the whiteness before counterfire could find him. He never used tracer rounds that might reveal his position. He never lit fires, even in the most punishing cold. He simply waited, watched, and when the moment came, applied the gentle pressure to the trigger that his father had taught him as a boy. On March 6, 1940, an explosive bullet fired by a Soviet soldier caught HÄYHÄ in the jaw, tearing away half his face. Fellow soldiers who found him said his head was a mass of blood, his jawbone shattered, and they assumed he was dead. They were wrong. When he regained consciousness a week later, the Winter War was ending. Finland had held off the Soviet giant against impossible odds, though they would ultimately cede the disputed territories. HÄYHÄ would undergo 26 surgeries to reconstruct his face. He would live with constant pain and disfigurement for the rest of his life. Yet he recovered, returning to the quiet rhythms of farming, rarely speaking of what he had done. When asked years later how he had become such an effective sniper, he replied simply, "Practice." When asked how many men he had killed, the official count stands at 505 confirmed with a rifle, plus another 200 with a submachine gun. He would look away and change the subject. He lived to be 96 years old, tending his farm in the same region where he had once been death incarnate, preferring solitude and the company of his dogs. He turned down movie deals and book offers. When the president of Finland asked what he would like as a gift, he requested only a better hunting rifle. In old age, visitors would find him living modestly, nothing about him suggesting that he had once been the most lethal sniper in military history. The forests of Karelia have grown over the battlefields now. Nature, as it always does, has reclaimed what men briefly contested. But something of HÄYHÄ's ghost still haunts those snow-filled spaces, a reminder that patience and intimate knowledge of the land can overcome overwhelming force. His legacy isn't about the number of lives he took, but about the qualities he embodied: endurance beyond human limits, discipline beyond ordinary comprehension, and a strange kind of humility in the face of his own lethal efficiency. In the cold silence of a Finnish winter, when breath turns to ice and trees crack from frost, one might still sense something of what HÄYHÄ understood. That true power lies in becoming so integrated with your environment that you disappear completely, leaving only your effect upon the world. The White Death, who moved through winter like winter itself, unnoticed until he was inevitable. The teacher turned marksman, Ivan Sidorenko. Before the German invasion of 1941, Ivan Sidorenko had never fired a military rifle in anger. The young art school graduate from the Smolensk region had been planning a life of canvases and color theory when history intervened. Within months, he would transform from a teacher of aesthetics to one of the most methodical dealers of death on the Eastern Front, his artist's eye repurposed for a grimmer canvas. The furnace of Smolensk, where Soviet forces desperately tried to halt the German blitzkrieg, forged many unlikely soldiers. But Sidorenko's transformation was remarkable even by the desperate standards of that summer. Drafted into a regular infantry unit, he showed an immediate and uncanny aptitude for marksmanship. His first confirmed kill came during a German advance near his home region, a moment he would later describe with the clinical detachment of someone analyzing brushstrokes rather than taking a life. "I noticed that when you observe long enough, men move in patterns," he told a Soviet war correspondent in 1943. "Even in chaos, they follow invisible lines. The trick is to see these lines before they do." This insight, that battlefield movement contains its own predictable geometry, became the foundation of Sidorenko's approach. Unlike HÄYHÄ, who had spent a lifetime preparing for his deadly work without knowing it, Sidorenko had to teach himself the craft of sniping in the midst of combat. He experimented with different positions, different times of day, different weather conditions. He kept meticulous notes, approaching his killing with the same analytical mind he had once applied to color composition. Soviet commanders, desperate for any advantage, noticed his rapidly growing tally and pulled him from regular infantry duty. What made Sidorenko truly valuable, however, wasn't just his ability to kill German soldiers. It was his ability to teach others to do the same. In the burned-out villages of Western Russia, with artillery permanently thundering in the background, Sidorenko established what amounted to a mobile sniper academy. His methods, initially improvised from personal experience, were later formalized into Soviet sniper manuals that would train thousands. He would begin with breath control, remembered one of his students. "For the first day, we did nothing but breathe, learning to slow our hearts. The rifle only extends what is already in you," he would say. "If there is turmoil inside, there will be inaccuracy outside." This psychological approach, treating sniping as an extension of internal states rather than merely technical skill, became Sidorenko's trademark. By 1942, Sidorenko was overseeing the training of over 250 apprentice snipers. He would take small groups into the field, setting up in the rubble of villages or the edge of forests. Dawn was his preferred teaching hour, when morning mist provided both concealment and a stable atmospheric medium for bullets. His students would watch as he engaged German positions, often deliberately revealing his location after the first shot to draw enemy snipers into what he called the conversation, the deadly back and forth of single-bullet duels. The first shot asks a question, he would instruct his students. The second shot answers it. But it is the silence between that determines who lives. This philosophical approach to killing made Sidorenko something of an enigma among Soviet officers, who were more accustomed to straightforward discussions of patriotism and sacrifice, yet his results were undeniable. By mid-1943, snipers trained by Sidorenko had accumulated over 30 confirmed kills. His own tally continued to grow as well. Operating primarily in the central sector of the Eastern Front, Sidorenko moved with the Soviet counter-offensives that followed Stalingrad. Unlike some snipers who specialized in particular terrains, Sidorenko adapted to each new battlefield with the versatility of someone who understood the underlying principles rather than mere techniques. In the ruins of Smolensk, recaptured in the fall of 1943, he recorded his highest monthly total, killing 17 German officers in a 3-week period. The Germans, for their part, devoted considerable resources to eliminating this teacher of death, as some of their intelligence reports called him. Counter-sniper teams were deployed specifically to hunt Sidorenko. Artillery would be directed against areas where he was suspected to operate. Yet he continued his deadly work with the imperturbable calm of someone who had accepted the strange mathematics of his situation, that his life depended on maintaining a perfect average, while his opponents needed to be lucky only once. In the spring of 1944, during the Soviet advance into Belarus, Sidorenko's luck finally faltered. A German mortar barrage caught him while he was relocating between positions. Severely wounded in the abdomen and leg, he was evacuated to a field hospital where surgeons doubted he would survive the night. With characteristic determination, he proved them wrong, though his days as an active sniper were over. The Soviet High Command, recognizing his value as an instructor, transferred him to a formal role at the Red Army's sniper training facilities once he had recovered sufficiently to work. Here, seated rather than prone, his wounded body supported by a chair rather than frozen earth, Sidorenko continued to shape the Soviet sniper program until the war's end. His estimated final tally stood at 500 confirmed kills, a number he neither confirmed nor denied when asked by post-war historians. After the war, Sidorenko disappeared into the kind of obscurity that seemed to claim many of the most effective snipers. He returned to the Smolensk region, but not to art. Whatever he had seen through his rifle sights had changed his relationship to aesthetics forever. He worked instead as a factory administrator, declining interviews and avoiding the spotlight. When Soviet officials attempted to include him in victory celebrations, he would often find reasons to be elsewhere. The art student who became a teacher of death left one final lesson that military strategists still study. Knowledge shared becomes knowledge multiplied. By training hundreds of others in his methods, Sidorenko's impact far exceeded his personal tally. In the brutal mathematics of the Eastern Front, this principle of knowledge transfer may have been his most lethal contribution, a reminder that in warfare, as in education, the best teachers create students who ultimately surpass them. Lady Death, LYUDMILA Pavlichenko. The men watching the University Rifle Club competition in Kiev in 1937 smirked as LYUDMILA Pavlichenko stepped up to the firing line. 21 years old, with dark hair pulled severely back from a determined face, she ignored their murmured comments. When the targets were checked, the smirks faded. She had outshot them all, clustering her rounds in a group tight enough to cover with a kopeck coin. 4 years later, those same marksmanship skills would make her the most successful female sniper in history and earn her the sobriquet that would follow her for life: Lady Death. Pavlichenko's journey to becoming a lethal symbol of Soviet resistance began not in military training, but in academic halls. Studying history at Kyiv University when the German invasion began, she was among the first wave of volunteers. When the recruitment officer suggested she become a nurse, her response was characteristically direct: "I wish to fight." She brought her own target shooting awards as proof of her capability. They gave her a rifle and 5 rounds to demonstrate. When all 5 hit the bullseye, the matter was settled. Assigned to the 25th Rifle Division, Pavlichenko was deployed to the defense of Odessa on the Black Sea coast in August 1941. The terrain could not have been more different from the frozen forests where HÄYHÄ had made his name. Here, the battleground was a sun-baked landscape of limestone cliffs and scrubby vegetation overlooking the besieged port city. Summer temperatures soared above 35 degrees Celsius. Water was scarce, and the Romanian and German forces pushing toward the city had the high ground. It was in these grueling conditions that Pavlichenko recorded her first kills. 2 Romanian soldiers spotted moving along an exposed ridgeline. "I felt terrible," she would later write in her memoirs. "The thought that I had taken human lives. Then I remembered the villages we had passed, the old men crucified on barn doors, the women. After that," she claimed, "she never hesitated again." Her hunting grounds became the network of gullies and ravines cutting through the limestone plateaus above Odessa. She would climb into position before dawn, sometimes spending the night in shallow depressions scraped into the hard earth, waiting for the first light to reveal enemy movements. Unlike forest snipers who might engage targets at extreme ranges, Pavlichenko's environment often brought her within 100 meters of her enemies, close enough to see faces, to time shots between heartbeats. When Odessa fell in October after a 73-day siege, Pavlichenko was evacuated by sea to Sevastopol in Crimea, where she would continue her deadly work during an even longer siege. By this time, her tally had reached 187 confirmed kills. German intelligence had identified her by name, and Nazi propaganda broadcasts would specifically address her. "Lyudmila Pavlichenko, abandon your rifle. Come sleep with me tonight instead of killing Germans." Her response came in the form of increased efficiency. Operating from the ruins of Soviet defensive positions as they were gradually pushed back toward the sea, Pavlichenko specialized in counter-sniping, deliberately hunting German and Romanian sharpshooters. This most dangerous form of sniping required her to use herself as bait, revealing just enough of her position to draw fire that would expose her opponent. "It is a conversation without words," she once explained. "You offer a target and see who accepts it." By May 1942, with the Sevastopol defenses crumbling, Pavlichenko had been wounded 4 times, and her official tally stood at 309 confirmed kills, including 36 enemy snipers. Soviet High Command, recognizing both her value as a symbol and the risk of losing her, evacuated her from Crimea shortly before the city's fall. Her war was about to take a very different turn, from the front lines to the spotlight of international diplomacy. Sent to the United States as part of a Soviet student delegation in 1942, Pavlichenko found herself thrust into the role of international celebrity. American reporters seemed more interested in her appearance than her accomplishments, asking questions about makeup and dress styles rather than tactics. At one press conference, exasperated by these trivialities, she delivered the line that would define her American tour. "Gentlemen, I am 25 years old, and I have killed 309 fascist invaders. Don't you think, gentlemen, that you have been hiding behind my back for too long?" The remark, cutting through patriarchal condescension with the same precision she had applied on the battlefield, made headlines across America. Suddenly, the press coverage shifted. Pavlichenko was invited to the White House, where Eleanor Roosevelt took a personal interest in her story. She toured war production factories, encouraging American workers with first-hand accounts of the Eastern Front. Her statement that American men seem to be doing very well on the production front, but should be fighting alongside us, was a pointed reminder of the disparate sacrifices being made. During this tour, something subtle but significant happened to the Pavlichenko narrative. Lady Death, the cold-eyed killer of Odessa and Sevastopol, was gradually reframed as a symbol of female capability and determination. The emphasis shifted from her lethality to her challenge to gender norms. This transformation suited Soviet propaganda needs, but it also reflected something genuine in Pavlichenko herself, a lifelong dedication to proving that competence had no gender. Upon returning to the Soviet Union, Pavlichenko was promoted to major and assigned to a training role, her combat days over. She spent the remainder of the war instructing new generations of snipers, with particular emphasis on integrating women into combat roles. Her instruction emphasized the psychological aspects of sniping as much as the technical, teaching students that the greatest weapon was not the rifle, but the ability to remain calm under the most extreme pressure. After the war, Pavlichenko completed her history degree and worked as a Soviet naval historian, researching and writing with the same methodical precision she had once applied to combat. She made few public appearances and gave few interviews, preferring scholarly work to the Lady Death persona that propaganda had created. When asked about her exceptional record, she would often redirect the conversation to the broader contributions of Soviet women during the war. The calm resolve that had made her so lethal on the battlefield seemed to sustain her through post-war life as well. Despite suffering from ongoing health problems related to her combat wounds and experiencing what would now be recognized as PTSD, she maintained a dignified public presence on the rare occasions when duty required her to represent her wartime role. In private, according to those who knew her, she remained haunted by what she had seen and done. Pavlichenko died in 1974, her legacy complex and in some ways still contested. Was she primarily a symbol of feminine capability, proving that women could excel even in roles traditionally dominated by men? Or was she simply an exceptional soldier whose gender was incidental to her deadly efficiency? Perhaps she was both, and in that duality lies the complexity of her story. The university student who became Lady Death, who killed with academic precision in the morning light above the Black Sea, and who quietly challenged assumptions wherever she went. Stalingrad shadow, Vasily Zaytsev. The artillery fog hung thick over the Volga on September 20, 1942, as the ferry carrying Vasily Zaytsev and his naval infantry unit pushed off from the eastern bank. Ahead lay Stalingrad, or what remained of it, a smoking panorama of shattered concrete and twisted metal where buildings stood like broken teeth against the sky. German shells dropped into the water around them, sending geysers higher than the ferry's deck. Men prayed or smoked in silence. Zaytsev, 27 years old, with the weathered face of a much older man, checked his rifle and watched the western shore approach. "We crossed the Volga as sailors," he would later write, "but we would fight and die as infantry." Born in the Ural Mountains and raised by his grandfather to hunt wolves and deer in the forests, Zaytsev had been serving as a clerk in the Soviet Pacific Fleet when volunteers were called for the defense of Stalingrad. Something in him, perhaps the hunter's instinct, perhaps simple patriotism, made him step forward. Within weeks, this decision would transform him from an anonymous sailor into a legend of urban combat. The Stalingrad that greeted Zaytsev bore little resemblance to any battlefield in military history. The German bombing had transformed the city into a three-dimensional maze of rubble, partially collapsed structures, and underground passages. Lines between front and rear areas blurred into meaninglessness. German and Soviet positions might be separated by nothing more than the width of a street, or could exist on different floors of the same building. In this broken landscape, conventional military doctrine failed. What emerged instead was a primitive, intimate form of combat where individual skill often mattered more than firepower. Zaytsev discovered his calling on his fourth day in the city. Assigned to a reconnaissance unit probing German positions near the central railway station, he used his hunting rifle to kill 5 German soldiers in quick succession. Political officers, desperate for any good news from Stalingrad, seized upon this small victory. Within days, Zaytsev was reassigned as a dedicated sniper and given a scoped Mosin Nagant rifle. The urban terrain of Stalingrad created unique challenges and opportunities for snipers. Unlike forest or field operations, distances were typically short, rarely exceeding 400 meters and often much less. Visibility was severely limited by dust, smoke, and the jumbled cityscape. But the Germans, confident in their eventual victory, often moved carelessly through areas they considered secure. Zaytsev exploited this overconfidence mercilessly. He developed a system he called the squirrel's nest, using 3 snipers working in coordination from different angles, triangulating their fire on high-value targets. One sniper would deliberately reveal his position with a shot, drawing the target's attention and potential counterfire. The second would eliminate the target when they moved to respond. The third covered both, ready to engage any additional threats. This method, developed in the crucible of Stalingrad, would later become standard doctrine for urban sniping operations worldwide. Zaytsev's growing reputation soon caught the attention of both Soviet propagandists and German commanders. By November, barely 6 weeks after his arrival in Stalingrad, his confirmed kill count had reached 149, an almost unbelievable rate of more than 3 kills per day in the most contested urban battlefield in history. Soviet newspapers celebrated the sniper from the Urals as a symbol of resistance. German operational reports specifically mentioned him as a significant threat to morale. It was this growing fame that gave rise to the most controversial episode of Zaytsev's wartime career, the supposed duel with a German sniper named König, or King. According to Soviet accounts, the Germans dispatched their top marksman, head of a Berlin sniper school, specifically to eliminate Zaytsev. For 3 days, these 2 masters of their craft stalked each other through the ruins of the Stalingrad tractor factory, neither able to get a clear advantage. Finally, Zaytsev used a clever ruse involving a raised helmet on a stick to trick König into revealing his position, allowing Zaytsev to make the killing shot. The reality of this duel remains contested by historians. German military records contain no mention of a sniper named König being deployed to Stalingrad, nor of any sniper duel receiving such high-level attention. Yet something happened in those factory ruins that elevated Zaytsev's status from merely effective sniper to near-mythic figure. Whether embellished by Soviet propagandists or based on an actual encounter with an unnamed German sharpshooter, the duel became inseparable from Zaytsev's legend. What is documented with certainty is Zaytsev's extraordinary effectiveness during Operation Uranus, the Soviet counteroffensive that began on November 19, 1942, and eventually trapped the German Sixth Army in Stalingrad. As Soviet forces pushed from the north and south to encircle the city, Zaytsev and his growing cadre of trained snipers focused on eliminating German officers and communication personnel, magnifying the confusion of the collapsing German position. By January 1943, with the German forces in Stalingrad reduced to starving pockets of resistance, Zaytsev's official tally stood at 225 confirmed kills, each verified by a commissar and requiring physical evidence such as weapons or documents taken from the bodies. Unofficial estimates placed the true number significantly higher, as many kills in the chaos of urban fighting could not be formally verified. On January 20, 1943, just days before the final German surrender in Stalingrad, Zaytsev's war took an unexpected turn. A mortar explosion near his position sent shrapnel into both eyes, temporarily blinding him. Evacuated to a field hospital and then to Moscow, he underwent multiple surgeries that partially restored sight to his right eye. Though he would never again have the precision vision that had made him so lethal, doctors managed to save enough of his sight that he could return to duty. Unable to continue as a sniper, Zaytsev devoted himself to passing on his knowledge. On the banks of the Volga, not far from where he had first crossed into Stalingrad, he established a sniper training facility that would become known as the Zaytsev School. Here, he formalized the techniques and tactics he had developed through bitter experience. By war's end, snipers trained under his guidance had accumulated more than 0 confirmed kills, making his educational impact far greater than his personal tally. Zaytsev returned to combat in 1944, commanding a mortar company during the Soviet advance through Ukraine and Poland. Though no longer able to apply his extraordinary marksmanship, he proved an effective leader, earning additional decorations for bravery. When the war ended, he was among the Soviet troops who entered Berlin, a symbolic completion of the journey that had begun in the ruins of Stalingrad. After demobilization, Zaytsev settled in Kyiv, working as an engineer and factory director. Like many veterans who had seen the worst of the Eastern Front, he spoke little of his wartime experiences, preferring to focus on rebuilding his life and his country. His eyesight continued to deteriorate, a constant reminder of the price he had paid in Stalingrad's rubble. In his final years, as Soviet authorities began preparing for the construction of the massive Mamayev-Kurgan Memorial Complex in Stalingrad, renamed Volgograd in 1961, Zaytsev made a pilgrimage back to the city where he had found his grim purpose. Standing on the hill where the fiercest fighting had occurred, now transformed into a monument to Soviet sacrifice, he reportedly said little, overcome by memories of what had happened there. Vasily Zaytsev died in 1991, just months before the dissolution of the Soviet Union he had fought to defend. He was buried with full military honors in Kyiv, his grave marked with the gold star of the hero of the Soviet Union. In death, as in life, his legacy remained complex, part documented history, part propaganda creation, all embedded in the particular horror that was Stalingrad. The sailor who became a shadow in the ruins, whose name became synonymous with a particular kind of deadly patience, had finally found the only peace that awaits all soldiers, regardless of their skill or fame. Fire in the Taiga. Fyodor OKHLOPKOV. When the Germans invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, Fyodor OKHLOPKOV was hunting in the vast Yakut Taiga, 1,000 miles east of Moscow. A member of the indigenous Yakut people, he had grown up in one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth, the Siberian wilderness where winter temperatures regularly plunged to -60 degrees Celsius. By the time he was 20, he could track a wolf across snow 3 days old and shoot the eye out of a squirrel at 100 paces with his grandfather's ancient rifle. This remote hunter would seem an unlikely candidate to become one of the most lethal snipers of the war. Yet the skills that had kept him alive in the taiga, patience, precision, and intuitive understanding of terrain and animal behavior, translated perfectly to the grim mathematics of the Eastern Front. When OKHLOPKOV volunteered in August 1941, his marksmanship immediately set him apart from the urban conscripts who constituted the bulk of the Soviet reinforcements. He didn't shoot like a soldier, one of his commanding officers later recalled. He shot like someone for whom the rifle was an extension of his eye and hand. There was no hesitation, no visible calculation. He simply pointed, and men died. Initially assigned to a regular rifle company, OKHLOPKOV was quickly reassigned as a dedicated sniper when his unit reached the front lines near Leningrad in late 1941. Unlike HÄYHÄ or ZAYTSEV, OKHLOPKOV never received a modern sniper rifle with telescopic sights. Throughout his service, he used a standard Mosin Nagant Mon 891 30 infantry rifle with iron sights, a weapon other snipers would have considered inadequate for precision work beyond 300 meters. Yet, OKHLOPKOV regularly engaged targets at 500 meters or more, compensating for the rifle's limitations with an almost supernatural ability to read wind, light, and distance. His hunting ground became the forests and swamps near Vitebsk, in what is now Belarus. Here, along a relatively static section of the front, he perfected techniques that blended his Yakut hunting heritage with the requirements of modern warfare. He was particularly known for night operations, crawling through no man's land in complete darkness to set up in positions that would catch German troops in the first light of dawn. "The Germans fear the dark," he wrote in a letter home to Siberia. "They cluster together and light cigarettes. They talk too much. They do not understand that the night forest has ears." This insight, that fear changes human behavior in predictable ways, informed OKHLOPKOV's tactical approach. He would deliberately target the soldiers who showed the most confidence, knowing that their deaths would amplify the fear of the survivors. By the summer of 1942, OKHLOPKOV's confirmed kill count had reached 158, despite being wounded twice, once in the arm and once in the shoulder. Each time, he returned to duty before his wounds had fully healed, driven by what his comrades described as a cold, implacable anger. Unlike some snipers who viewed their work with professional detachment, OKHLOPKOV seems to have been genuinely motivated by hatred for the invaders who had brought war to his country. This fury found its most effective expression during the massive Soviet counteroffensive of 1943–44. As the Red Army pushed westward, OKHLOPKOV moved with the advance, often operating far ahead of the main Soviet forces. He developed a technique he called stinging, infiltrating German rear areas to eliminate officers and radiomen, then disappearing before counter-sniper teams could locate him. German intelligence reports from this period refer to an Eastern Ghost operating behind their lines, almost certainly a reference to OKHLOPKOV's shadow campaign. In February 1944, near the Belarusian town of Orsha, OKHLOPKOV achieved what might be considered the pinnacle of the sniper's art. Positioned in a damaged church tower, he eliminated 27 German soldiers over a 3-day period as they attempted to cross an exposed bridge. What made this feat remarkable was not just the number, but the fact that after the first few kills, every German soldier knew the bridge was covered by a sniper. They tried crossing at night, using smoke, sending sacrificial vehicles as distractions. Nothing worked. OKHLOPKOV, drawing on the patience learned in Siberian hunting blinds, simply waited them out. The toll on OKHLOPKOV himself was considerable. Like all effective snipers, he lived in a state of constant, focused tension, often going days without proper sleep or warm food. The psychological burden of killing at close range, where he could see his targets as individuals rather than anonymous enemies, left marks his comrades could see. After Orsha, something in him had changed. One recalled. He spoke even less than before, and his eyes had the look of a man who has seen too far into the darkness. In August 1944, during fighting near the Lithuanian border, OKHLOPKOV was severely wounded for a third time. A German counterattack had overrun the Soviet forward positions, and he found himself engaged in close-quarters combat for which snipers are not trained. Shot through the chest, he nevertheless managed to kill 4 German soldiers with his sidearm before collapsing. Fellow soldiers who dragged him to safety reported that his first words upon regaining consciousness were to ask if his rifle had been recovered. This third wound finally removed OKHLOPKOV from frontline service. His official tally stood at 429 confirmed kills, though like most such counts from the Eastern Front, the true number was likely higher. In recognition of his extraordinary service, he was awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union, the USSR's highest military honor. The citation specifically mentioned not just his effectiveness as a sniper, but his role in training other snipers and his participation in capturing 78 German prisoners. After recovering from his wounds, OKHLOPKOV returned not to the front but to his native Yakutia in eastern Siberia. Here, amid the taiga forests where he had learned to hunt, he took up work as a forestry manager, becoming responsible for protecting the very wilderness that had formed him. He rarely spoke of the war, and when pressed would change the subject to forestry conservation or traditional Yakut hunting techniques. What distinguished OKHLOPKOV from many other decorated Soviet veterans was his complete disinterest in the political dimensions of his service. While ZAYTSEV and PAVLICHENKO became, willingly or not, symbols in Soviet propaganda, OKHLOPKOV refused all invitations to speak at patriotic events or to write memoirs. His neighbors reported that he would walk alone into the taiga for days at a time, returning with game but no explanations. This silence, the same quality that had made him so lethal on the battlefield, defined his post-war life. In the forests where his ancestors had hunted for countless generations, he seemed to find some measure of peace that eluded many veterans. Those who worked with him in the forestry service described a man of few words but decisive actions, respected for his practical knowledge rather than his wartime record. Fyodor OKHLOPKOV died in 1968, having lived just long enough to see the beginnings of the Soviet environmental movement to which he had devoted his post-war career. He was buried near his home village, his grave marked with both the gold star of his Hero of the Soviet Union award and traditional Yakut symbols of the hunter's path. The forest he had once used as a training ground for war, he had spent his remaining years protecting and nurturing a final reconciliation between the hunter and the warrior, between taking life and preserving it. In the depths of the Siberian taiga, where the silence is so complete it becomes a presence itself, something of OKHLOPKOV's spirit remains, a reminder that the deadliest predators are not those with the sharpest claws or the largest weapons, but those who have learned to move through the world unseen, to wait without impatience, and to act without hesitation when the moment arrives. The Yakut hunter who became fire in the frozen lands of the Eastern Front, and who returned to tend the silence he had once used as a weapon. Alpine patience. MATTHÄUS HETZENAUER. The jagged peaks of the Austrian Tyrol taught young MATTHÄUS HETZENAUER patience before he ever held a military rifle. Born to a family of shepherds in December 1924, he spent his boyhood summers high on alpine slopes, watching over flocks as they grazed across steep meadows. These mountains were his first teachers of ballistics, the way wind curled through valleys, how distance played tricks with the eye, and how stillness was a virtue earned through practice. When winter snows drove the sheep to lower pastures, Hetzenauer would hunt chamois with his father's old rifle, learning to judge distance across vast spaces where sound travels differently and light bends with altitude. The locals tell of how he could hit targets across ravines that other villagers wouldn't even attempt. This natural aptitude served him well when, at 19, the tide of war swept him into Wehrmacht service. By late 1944, the Eastern Front had become a brutal theatre of attrition. As Soviet forces pushed westward, Hetzenauer found himself deployed to the frigid Carpathian Mountains. The bitter winter there wasn't unlike his native Alps, but the similarities ended with the landscape. Here, every shadow concealed potential death, and the snow became both canvas and shroud. Equipped with the standard Karabiner 98K bolt-action rifle fitted with a ZF-42 scope, Hetzenauer established a methodical approach that distinguished him from other marksmen. He never rushed. Instead of seeking a high daily count, he preferred what he called a natural rhythm, 3 to 5 carefully selected shots per day. Each target was chosen with deliberate purpose, often focusing on officers, radio operators, or machine gun crews. "The cold makes men impatient," he once told a fellow soldier, "but the mountain teaches you that nature moves at its own pace." This philosophy informed his technique. He would sometimes remain motionless for hours, his breathing slowed to match the mountain's stillness, waiting for the perfect alignment of opportunity and readiness. The Austrian's precision earned him the Knight's Cross in February 1945, rare recognition for a sniper. By war's end, his official tally stood at 345 confirmed kills, though military historians suggest the actual number may have been higher. His longest confirmed shot reportedly exceeded 100 meters, a remarkable achievement with the optics available at that time. Hetzenauer paid a steep price for his deadly effectiveness. Frostbite scarred his hands and feet during that terrible winter. The constant exposure to extreme cold, while remaining motionless for extended periods, damaged his circulation permanently. Yet he endured these conditions without complaint, demonstrating the same stoicism that made him lethal behind a scope. When Soviet forces finally captured him in May 1945, Hetzenauer's war ended, but his ordeal continued. The Red Army, well aware of the damage snipers had inflicted on their ranks, showed little mercy to those they captured. He spent 5 years in Soviet captivity, working in labor camps under harsh conditions that tested even his Alpine-hardened constitution. Upon his eventual return to Austria in 1950, Hetzenauer retreated into quiet civilian life. He found work as a carpenter and builder, constructing modest cottages throughout the Tyrolean valleys. Those who knew him in these later years described a gentle craftsman with calloused hands who took pride in creating homes rather than taking lives. Perhaps most telling about Hetzenauer's character was his silence regarding the war. He never spoke publicly about his experiences, never wrote memoirs, never sought recognition. The mountains had taught him another lesson, that some things are better left undisturbed. When pressed about his military service, he would simply change the subject or excuse himself politely. MATTHÄUS HETZENAUER died in 2004, his passing as quiet as his post-war life. The shepherd boy from the Alps, who became one of history's deadliest snipers, left behind. No grand statements, no philosophical justifications, only the echo of precision shots across mountain valleys, fading into the silence he so carefully cultivated. Broken barrel, sharp eye. Josef Allerberger. While MATTHÄUS HETZENAUER stalked the eastern ridges, another Tyrolean marksman was writing his own deadly chapter in the annals of sniping history. Josef Allerberger began his military career with an inauspicious start, as a machine gunner whose first taste of combat left him wounded and his unit decimated near Stavropol. His transformation into one of history's most lethal snipers began with necessity rather than design. During his convalescence, Allerberger acquired a damaged Mosin Nagant rifle from a fallen Soviet soldier. The barrel had split at the muzzle, a fatal flaw for most shooters, but Allerberger was a trained gunsmith's son. Rather than discard the weapon, he meticulously cut back the damaged portion and fashioned an improvised sight. What emerged from his tinkering wasn't regulation equipment, but it became his signature tool. "The perfect weapon chooses you," he later told a fellow soldier. "Mine came to me broken, as was I." This modified rifle, with its shortened barrel and unconventional periscope sight, allowed Allerberger to remain completely concealed while taking aim, a tactical advantage that saved his life countless times in the war's waning months. Allerberger and Hetzenauer occasionally operated in proximity, though their relationship was more pragmatic than competitive. The two Austrians understood that their contest wasn't against each other but against the grinding machinery of survival. "We counted because counting kept us sane," wrote a platoon mate who observed them both. They were keeping score against death itself. Perhaps the most macabre innovation Allerberger developed was his use of captured Soviet steel plates. Where other snipers relied solely on camouflage and concealment, he fashioned these heavy armor pieces into mobile shields. Propped at precise angles in his hide positions, they could deflect counter-sniper fire while still allowing him narrow firing ports. The weight was punishing to transport, but as winter settled across the Eastern Front, the steel also retained precious body heat during long observation hours. His technique differed from Hetzenauer's measured patience. Allerberger preferred to change positions frequently, taking more shots from various locations rather than waiting for perfect opportunities. This mobility made him harder to track and counter, though it required an intuitive understanding of terrain that his mountain upbringing had instilled. By war's end, Allerberger's official tally stood at 257 confirmed kills, though like many such figures from the Eastern Front, verification remains challenging. What distinguished him wasn't merely his accuracy but his uncanny ability to anticipate enemy movements. Fellow soldiers described his sixth sense for knowing when Soviet snipers were setting up counter-positions. The final months of the war found Allerberger engaged in a desperate fighting retreat through Hungary and into Austria. As Soviet forces closed in, he destroyed his modified rifle rather than let it be captured. When asked why, he reportedly said, "Some partnerships should end by choice, not circumstance." After surviving the chaos of surrender, Allerberger returned to civilian life with the same quiet determination that had kept him alive at the front. He resumed his pre-war carpentry trade, crafting furniture of exquisite quality in a small workshop near Salzburg. Customers who commissioned his work never knew they were in the presence of one of the war's deadliest snipers. Like Hetzenauer, Allerberger maintained a self-imposed vow of anonymity. He refused all interviews, declined to join veterans' organizations, and never discussed his wartime experiences even with close family. His craftsmanship became his identity. Hands that once squeezed triggers now shaped wood with the same precision and care. Josef Allerberger died in March 2010, having taken the detailed accounts of his experiences to the grave. What remains are the spare military records, the fading recollections of those who served alongside him, and the enduring testament to how ingenuity and adaptation can transform even broken instruments into effective tools of warfare. Green Hill Hero, Jang TAOFANG Korean War. The bitter Korean winter of 1952 found a 22-year-old former farmer's son from Henan province, huddled on a windswept ridge known only by its tactical designation. Height 597.9. Zhang Taofang had been a soldier for less than a year, drafted into the Chinese People's Volunteer Army with minimal training and even less experience. What distinguished him wasn't prior marksmanship, but an uncommon steadiness of hand and clarity of purpose. Unlike the German snipers of the previous war, Zhang operated without the advantage of telescopic sights. His weapon was a standard Mosin Nagant rifle with open iron sights, technology essentially unchanged since before the First World War. What should have been a severe limitation instead became central to his legend. "The rifle is merely a vessel," Zhang reportedly told his commander. "The eye guides, but the heart steadies." This philosophy underpinned his most innovative contribution to snipercraft. Zhang developed a technique of timing his shots between heartbeats. He would exhale slowly, feel the momentary stillness between cardiac pulses, and squeeze the trigger in that fraction of a second when his body was most stable. For 32 consecutive days, Zhang maintained his position on that freezing hillside, engaging primarily in duels with United Nations forces arrayed across the valley. Most of his confirmed kills came at the relatively close range of 200 meters, distance that might seem modest compared to modern sniper shots, but required extraordinary precision with iron sights, especially given the challenging conditions. His daily routine became a model of austere discipline. Zhang would rise before dawn, consuming a small portion of rice while studying the changing light. He understood that shooting west in morning hours or east in the afternoon gave him the advantage of putting the sun at his back while forcing his targets to peer into its glare. This natural tactical advantage multiplied his effectiveness. The psychological impact of Zhang's presence extended far beyond his actual casualties. UN forces began to whisper about the Chinese ghost who seemed to materialize from nowhere. Routine movements became tense exercises in vulnerability. Supply deliveries were rescheduled to night hours, and trench rotations became hazardous undertakings. One American sergeant described it as feeling naked under a magnifying glass. By the time Zhang was finally rotated from his position, his official tally stood at 214 confirmed kills, all achieved with open sights, and each meticulously recorded in a small notebook he kept. While some Western military historians have questioned this figure, Chinese military records maintain its accuracy, pointing to the rigorous verification process used by PVA forces. Perhaps more remarkable than the number was the consistency. Zhang never experienced a day without at least one confirmed kill during his 32-day deployment. This methodical accumulation spoke to his patient approach and selective targeting. Unlike some snipers who prioritized officers, Zhang often focused on regular infantry, understanding that in the war of attrition that Korea had become, every casualty placed strain on enemy resources. After the armistice, Zhang returned to civilian life with little fanfare. He joined an agricultural commune in his home province, where his steady hands proved equally valuable in delicate cultivation work. For decades, his achievements remained largely unrecognized outside military circles, consistent with China's collective approach to wartime heroism. It wasn't until the 1980s that Zhang began to receive public recognition for his service. By then, his techniques had been incorporated into Chinese military training, particularly his methods of breath control and heartbeat synchronization. Young snipers were taught to place fingers on their wrists, counting pulses and learning to find that momentary stillness Zhang had mastered. When interviewed in his later years, Zhang displayed the same modesty that characterized many great marksmen. "I was no hero," he insisted, "just a farmer who learned to plant bullets instead of seeds for a while." This humility belied his significant contribution to sniper methodology, proving that technological advantages, while helpful, were never substitutes for the fundamentals of discipline, patience, and self-control. Zhang Taofang died in 2010, having lived long enough to see his techniques taught to generations of Chinese marksmen. The farmer's son, who once watched seedlings grow with patient attention, had demonstrated how that same focused stillness could be applied to warfare's most precise discipline. The Mekong ghost, ADELBERT Waldron. The dense mangrove swamps of the Mekong Delta offered a dramatically different arena for snipercraft than the mountains of Europe or the hills of Korea. Here, in the steaming verdancy of Vietnam's southern waterways, Staff Sergeant Adelbert Waldron III discovered that a rocking boat could become a sniper's perch with the right adaptations. Waldron came to Vietnam in 1969 with the 9th Infantry Division's Mobile Riverine Force, soldiers who navigated the labyrinthine waterways on shallow-draft patrol boats. The constant movement should have made precision shooting impossible. Instead, Waldron developed techniques to transform this liability into an advantage, using the rhythmic swaying of boats to time his shots much as a marksman might work with his breathing. "The river has a pulse," he once explained to a new spotter. "You don't fight it, you wait for the moment it aligns with your intention." This philosophical approach masked the extraordinary mathematics Waldron performed instinctively, calculating how a moving platform affected trajectory while simultaneously accounting for wind, humidity, and distance. Unlike many snipers who preferred dawn or dusk operations, Waldron often worked during the harsh midday hours when sunlight fractured through the canopy, creating a disorienting mosaic of light and shadow. The haze rising from the warm waters created mirage effects that would have confounded lesser marksmen. Yet Waldron seemed to interpret these distortions instinctively, as if reading a language others found indecipherable. His most legendary shot came on a sweltering afternoon near the Seven Mountains region. From a patrol boat navigating a channel, Waldron spotted enemy movement on a distant bank. Using his XM-21 sniper rifle, a modified M14 with a Leatherwood 3.9 scope, he took a single shot measured later at approximately 900 meters, all while standing on a moving boat. The shot's extraordinary difficulty was compounded by humidity that would have affected both optics and ballistics. "I didn't think it was possible until I saw the enemy fall," his boat commander later reported. "Then I understood why they called him the Ghost." By the end of his tour, Waldron had accumulated 109 confirmed kills, the highest tally of any American sniper in Vietnam up to that point. More remarkable than the number was the condition under which many were achieved. Unlike traditional snipers with prepared positions and stable platforms, Waldron operated in a constantly shifting environment where variables multiplied with every passing minute. Between missions, Waldron could often be found engaged in unhurried card games with younger scouts. These casual sessions served a dual purpose. They steadied his hands and provided opportunities to mentor less experienced soldiers. "Watch how they hold their cards, not what they play," he would advise, teaching observation skills through recreation. Those who served with Waldron described a quiet professional whose effectiveness stemmed from methodical preparation rather than dramatic action. He maintained his equipment with religious dedication, particularly his scope, which required constant protection from the Delta's omnipresent moisture. Each morning, he would carefully clean the lenses with supplies he rationed more carefully than his own food. When his tour concluded, Waldron returned to the United States with little desire for recognition. He settled near the Chesapeake Bay, where he found peace in fishing, another pursuit requiring patience and precision. The rhythmic rocking of his small fishing boat echoed the patrol craft of Vietnam, though now it carried rods instead of rifles. Adelbert Waldron died in 1995, his remarkable achievements known primarily within military circles rather than to the wider public. His techniques for shooting from unstable platforms revolutionized maritime special operations, influencing modern counter-piracy and Coast Guard sniper programs worldwide. The Mekong Ghost had shown that with sufficient skill, even the most challenging environments could become hunting grounds for those patient enough to learn their rhythms. Quiet Marine, Chuck Mahoney. In the shadowed valleys of Vietnam's Quang Nam province, where elephant grass swayed like ocean waves and the air hung thick with monsoon moisture, Chuck Mahoney discovered his terrible gift. The son of an Oregon Marine who had fought in World War II, Mahoney arrived in Vietnam in 1968 with keen eyes, steady hands, and a hunter's intuition honed in the Pacific Northwest forests. What distinguished Mahoney wasn't merely technical proficiency, but an almost supernatural patience. On a muggy evening in 1969, he positioned himself along the Elephant Valley Trail, a known infiltration route used by North Vietnamese forces. For 16 uninterrupted hours, he remained motionless in his hide, ignoring the crawling insects, the cramping muscles, and the gnawing hunger that plagued him. As darkness settled over the valley, Mawhinney's vigilance was rewarded. A North Vietnamese unit, moving with the confidence of those who believe themselves unseen, entered his pre-ranged killing zone. In the span of 30 minutes, he eliminated 16 enemy soldiers with 16 precisely placed shots. The Marines who recovered the bodies the following morning found each marked by the same clinical efficiency, single rounds, most through the head or upper torso. "I never saw them as people," Mawhinney later reflected during a rare moment of candor. "They were targets with a mission to kill Marines. My mission was to make sure they didn't." This emotional detachment, coupled with his technical precision, made him exceptionally effective in his lethal work. Mawhinney's official record stands at 103 confirmed kills, with another 216 probables, enemies struck but whose bodies couldn't be recovered for verification. Military historians note this discrepancy as evidence of his emphasis on effectiveness rather than recognition. Where other snipers might have insisted on confirmation for record purposes, Mawhinney concerned himself only with the tactical impact of his work. Unlike some who reveled in the body count mentality that infected certain units, Mawhinney approached sniping with professional restraint. He refused to take trophy shots or engage targets when civilian casualties might result. His spotter once described watching him track a high-ranking officer for nearly an hour before quietly standing down, because the shot would have endangered nearby village children. His weapon of choice was the standard Marine Corps M40 bolt-action rifle with a Redfield 39x scope, reliable but hardly cutting-edge technology even for that era. What elevated Mawhinney's performance wasn't his equipment, but his fundamental understanding of external ballistics. He maintained meticulous data books recording every environmental condition, temperature, humidity, wind patterns across different valleys. This scientific approach transformed shooting from art to mathematics. Perhaps Mawhinney's most valuable contribution wasn't his individual kills, but his development of doctrine. He pioneered techniques for operating in the triple canopy jungle, particularly methods for establishing shooting positions that provided both concealment and escape routes. Many of his innovations were later incorporated into the Marine Corps Scout Sniper program's formal curriculum. When his tour ended, Mawhinney returned to Oregon and deliberately disappeared into civilian anonymity. He took a position at a lumber mill, where the precise adjustments required for optimal cutting fed the same part of his brain that once calculated wind drift and bullet drop. For decades, his neighbors and co-workers remained unaware of his military record, knowing him only as a reliable, quiet colleague. It wasn't until 1991 that Mawhinney's accomplishments became public knowledge, when a fellow Marine sniper mentioned him in a book about Vietnam. The subsequent attention was unwelcome for a man who had spent 20 years avoiding his wartime identity. "I put all that away," he told a persistent reporter. "Left it in country where it belonged." Eventually, Mawhinney made peace with his past, occasionally speaking to Marine Scout sniper classes about the psychological aspects of the profession. His emphasis was always on discipline rather than glorification. The importance of knowing when not to take a shot mattered as much as knowing how to make one. Chuck Mahanning's legacy lies not in his impressive statistics but in his embodiment of the sniper's essential duality, the capacity for both patient restraint and decisive action. The quiet Marine who vanished into civilian life demonstrated that history's most effective warriors often seek no recognition for their deadly work, finding greater satisfaction in the precision of performance than in public acknowledgement of its results. White Feather, Carlos, Hathcock. The morning mists rising off the Arkansas swamps taught young Carlos Hathcock his first lessons in patience. Born in 1942 to a family where hunting wasn't sport but survival, he learned to track, shoot, and most importantly, to wait. By age 10, he was putting meat on his family's table with a Mauser rifle nearly as tall as himself, stalking the elusive white-tailed deer through cypress groves and shadowed bayous. "The woods will feed you," his father told him, "but only if you speak their language." This early education in nature's subtle dialogue, the way brush moves differently with wind than with passing animals, how certain birds fall silent when predators approach, formed the foundation for what would become legendary martial skill. When Hathcock arrived in Vietnam in 1966 as a military policeman, his marksmanship quickly drew attention. Transferred to sniper duties, he approached warfare with the same methodical attention he once applied to hunting. The white feather he wore tucked in his bush hat's band, a childhood talisman from those Arkansas hunting days, became his calling card and eventual nickname among both allies and enemies. Hathcock's confirmed kill count reached 93 during his tours, but this number fails to capture his tactical impact. His longest confirmed kill came near the Cambodian border, where he eliminated an enemy machine gunner at 500 meters, a shot taken with an M2.50 caliber Browning machine gun mounted with a scope, a weapon never designed for precision shooting. This improvised solution demonstrated Hathcock's intuitive understanding of ballistics that transcended formal training. Yet numbers and distances don't illuminate Hathcock's most remarkable operations. In one mission that entered Marine Corps legend, he crawled more than 500 meters across open ground over 4 days to eliminate a North Vietnamese army general. Moving inches at a time, freezing in position whenever enemy patrols passed nearby, he remained so still that a venomous snake slithered across his outstretched arm without triggering a reaction. After taking his shot, he crawled back through the same fields, evading the massive search parties deployed to find him. Patience is a weapon, he later told his sniper students, sometimes the only one that matters. The North Vietnamese placed a 30-0 bounty on White Feather Sniper, an astronomical sum at that time. They sent their own snipers specifically to hunt him. One, known as Cobra, killed several Marines before Hathcock ended their duel with a shot through the enemy sniper's own scope, catching him watching Hathcock's position. The bullet traveled straight through the optic into the eye behind it. That was the best shot I ever made, Hathcock later recalled, not because it was long range, but because we both knew exactly what we were doing. Perhaps Hathcock's most selfless act came in 1969, when he pulled 7 Marines from a burning amphibious vehicle after it struck a mine. Despite suffering severe burns over much of his body, he returned repeatedly to the flaming wreckage until all survivors were extracted. These injuries, more than enemy fire, would ultimately end his military career. The physical toll of Vietnam followed Hathcock home. Beyond the burn scars, he began experiencing symptoms of multiple sclerosis in the early 1970s. The disease that would eventually confine him to a wheelchair presented a cruel irony. The man whose hands had once been steady enough to place shots at 1,000 meters now struggled to hold a coffee cup without spilling. Despite his deteriorating health, Hathcock helped establish the Marine Corps Scout Sniper School at Quantico, developing training protocols that continue influencing military marksmanship worldwide. His emphasis on fieldcraft over mere shooting fundamentally shaped modern sniper doctrine. Shooting's just a small part, he would tell students. Knowing where to be and when to be there, that's what keeps you alive. In his later years, as multiple sclerosis increasingly restricted his mobility, Hathcock found purpose in coaching competitive shooters and counseling returning veterans. The humble Arkansas boy who had become a military legend maintained that his greatest achievement wasn't any particular shot, but the Marines he'd protected through his work. "I never killed anybody I didn't have to," he insisted when interviewed about his record. "Never taken any pleasure in it either. Each one was a job that needed doing to save our boys." Carlos Hathcock died in 1999 after decades of declining health, his passing marked by quiet tributes throughout the military community. The white feather that had once struck fear in enemy hearts became a symbol of precision and professionalism for generations of Marine snipers who followed his path. His legacy isn't measured merely in confirmed kills, but in the doctrine he developed, the lives he saved, and the standard of ethical lethality he established for those who would take up the sniper's solitary burden. Silence in the trenches. Francis Pagama-Gabao, where the mud-choked trenches of the Western Front seemed worlds away from the pristine shores of Georgian Bay, where Francis Pagama-Gabao had learned to move through forests with ghost-like silence. Born in 1891 on the Parry Island Indian Reserve, This Ojibwe marksman brought ancestral hunting traditions to the industrial slaughter of the Great War, creating a lethal synthesis of indigenous woodcraft and military precision. When Pegamagabo enlisted in the Canadian Expeditionary Force in 1914, military officials quickly recognized his exceptional abilities. While European soldiers often struggled with the disorienting nature of trench warfare, Pegamagabo navigated the shattered landscape with intuitive ease. The shattered woods of no man's land, with their splintered trees and crater-pocked earth, were read by his trained eye as clearly as any forest trail back home. "The spirits still live in these broken places," he reportedly told a fellow scout. "They whisper where danger waits if you know how to listen." This integration of spiritual awareness with tactical observation distinguished his approach from the more mechanical methods taught in military manuals. Pegamagabo's effectiveness emerged not in daylight engagements but in the realm between dusk and dawn. Under moonlight that transformed the battlefield into a silver-washed nightmare, he would slip beyond Canadian lines, sometimes crawling for hours through mud and barbed wire to establish positions behind German trenches. There, with supernatural patience, he would observe enemy movements, gather intelligence, and when the moment was perfect, eliminate key targets. His preferred weapon was the standard-issue Ross rifle, later replaced by the Lee Enfield, both bolt-action firearms that demanded methodical precision. Unlike later conflicts where snipers operated with specialized equipment, Pegamagabo achieved his remarkable results with the same basic infantry rifle issued to thousands of other soldiers. The difference lay not in his tools but in his application of skills, honed through a lifetime of subsistence hunting. By war's end, Pegamagabo had accumulated an astonishing record: 378 confirmed kills, and approximately 300 enemy soldiers captured during reconnaissance missions. This combined impact, both lethal and intelligence gathering, made him arguably the most effective Allied soldier of the entire conflict. He was awarded the Military Medal 3 times, a recognition so rare that only a handful of Canadian soldiers could claim similar honors. What made these achievements more remarkable was the discrimination he faced within his own military. Despite his exceptional service, Pegamagabo was repeatedly passed over for promotion due to his indigenous heritage. The same military system that celebrated his kills maintained rigid barriers to his advancement, a bitter irony not lost on the Ojibwe warrior. Those few who gained his confidence described how Pegamagabo would occasionally share stories of his nocturnal operations, speaking in the low, measured cadence of Anishinaabe tradition. These rare narratives weren't boastful recountings, but almost ceremonial acknowledgments of lives taken and dangers faced. He would sometimes incorporate traditional words when English failed to capture the nuances of stalking and killing in the war-transformed landscape. "He never spoke of enemies as Germans," recalled one fellow soldier. "They were simply the others, men whose paths crossed his in a place where only one could continue." This philosophical detachment allowed Pegamagabo to perform his deadly work without apparent psychological damage, a resilience not shared by many of his European counterparts. When Pegamagabo returned to Canada after the war, he discovered that the country whose uniform he had honored viewed him as a second-class citizen. The Indian Act severely restricted his rights, and the military honors that should have opened doors instead gathered dust. Undeterred, he channeled the same patient determination that had served him in combat into a new mission, advocating for Indigenous rights across Canada. Elected chief of the Parry Island Band, now Wasauksing First Nation, multiple times, Pegamagabo became a founding member of the Native Independent Government, an early Indigenous rights organization. His letters to government officials displayed the same precision he had once applied to marksmanship, methodically dismantling the logic of discriminatory policies. "They asked me to kill for this country," he wrote in one such letter, "then told me I had no right to speak for it." Francis Pegamagabo died in 1952, his military achievements largely overlooked by mainstream Canadian society for decades. It wasn't until the late 20th century that historians began recognizing him as not only Canada's most effective sniper, but one of the most accomplished Allied soldiers of the First World War. Today, a bronze statue stands in Parry Sound, Ontario, depicting him in his military uniform, finally giving physical form to a legacy long kept in shadow. The silence that served Pega-Magabao in the trenches of France extended into much of his civilian life, a quiet dignity maintained in the face of systemic injustice. The deadliest sniper of the Great War demonstrated that the same hands capable of taking hundreds of lives could also carefully build a foundation for his people's future, showing a kind of courage that transcended the battlefield. The Métis ghost, Henry Norwest. The chalky ridges near Vimy transformed Henry Norwest from a peacetime rodeo performer into a wartime phantom. Born to a Cree mother and French father in Fort Saskatchewan, this Métis marksman brought the versatile skills of Canada's frontier to the static horror of trench warfare, creating a legend that still echoes through military circles a century later. Before the war pulled him into its machinery, Norwest had built a reputation across the Canadian West as a bronco rider whose hands remained steady regardless of how violently his mount bucked beneath him. This same unshakable composure would serve him well when peering through a rifle scope at distant German positions, his breathing controlled despite artillery bursting nearby. Norwest enlisted in 1915 under the name Henry Louis, temporarily hiding his indigenous heritage to circumvent recruiting prejudices. Despite this initial subterfuge, his natural aptitude for scouting and marksmanship quickly drew attention from officers seeking effective snipers. The Canadian Corps, like other Allied forces, was beginning to recognize the strategic value of precision shooting in breaking the stalemate of trench warfare. He had eyes that could spot movement where others saw only stillness, wrote his spotter in a field journal. Sometimes he would fire at what looked like nothing, and only after we checked the next day would I understand what he had seen. This uncanny perception extended beyond daylight operations. Norwest developed techniques for night shooting that utilized the brief flashes of artillery to illuminate targets momentarily, a method requiring split-second timing and instinctive firing. His ritual before each mission became legendary among the men of his unit. Norwest would methodically chew spruce gum, a habit from his frontier days, claiming it steadied his nerves and sharpened his senses. Whether this effect was pharmacological or psychological remains debatable, but the routine became inseparable from his success. Supply officers made special arrangements to ensure he never lacked this simple comfort. Over 2 years at the front, Norwest accumulated 115 confirmed kills, making him the most prolific Canadian sniper of the Great War after Pega-Magabao. This figure represented only his verified eliminations. The actual toll was likely considerably higher. Unlike some snipers who operated primarily from fixed positions, Norwest frequently infiltrated no man's land, establishing temporary hides that allowed for flanking shots along enemy trenches. The psychological impact of his work extended beyond the numerical losses he inflicted. German units facing sectors where Norwest operated reported increased stress and decreased morale. One captured officer's diary referred to the ghost shooter, who seemed able to strike without warning, forcing men to stay below the parapet even during relatively quiet periods, effectively paralyzing routine operations. "He doesn't just kill them," a Canadian lieutenant observed. "He makes them afraid to live." This terror weapon aspect of sniping, the way it constrained enemy movement and degraded fighting effectiveness through fear, represented Norwest's most significant tactical contribution. Despite his lethal efficiency, comrades described Norwest as gentle and soft-spoken in camp, often entertaining fellow soldiers with stories of rodeo adventures or teaching them tracking techniques from his Métis upbringing. This duality, the compassionate comrade and merciless hunter, embodied the psychological complexity required of effective snipers. As the war ground toward its conclusion, Norwest participated in the final Allied advance near Amiens in August 1918. After more than 2 years of survival against the odds, his luck finally expired just 3 months before the armistice. While setting up an observation post, he was killed by an enemy sniper who had been specifically tasked with eliminating the legendary Métis ghost. Henry Norwest was buried where he fell, amidst the wheat fields of northern France. His simple headstone at Warvilla's churchyard extension bears the inscription requested by his comrades. "It must have been a damned good sniper that got him." This understated tribute captured both their respect for his skill and their belief that only exceptional ability could have ended his remarkable run. The story of Henry Norwest remained primarily within military and indigenous oral histories for decades after his death. Unlike more celebrated war heroes, his achievements received little official recognition until recent years, when Canadian military historians began reassessing the contributions of Indigenous soldiers. Today, his name is included among distinguished Canadian snipers, whose techniques and approaches formed the foundation for modern military marksmanship doctrine. The Métis ghost who once rode bucking broncos across western plains found his final rest in foreign soil, leaving behind a legacy that bridges Indigenous hunting traditions and modern warfare, a testament to adaptability, patience, and the quiet courage required to face death alone in the space between opposing armies. The assassin of Gallipoli, Billy Singh. The harsh Australian outback, where distance distorts perception and heat creates shimmering mirages, provided Billy Singh with his first lessons in long-range shooting. Born in 1886 to a Chinese father and English mother, Singh grew up facing the dual challenges of Queensland's unforgiving landscape and the casual racism of colonial Australia. Both experiences shaped the remarkable marksman who would later haunt Turkish trenches at Gallipoli. Before the war, Singh earned his living as a stockman, an occasional competitive shooter, winning numerous prizes at regional contests. These civilian competitions, however demanding, offered poor preparation for the grim work awaiting him on the dusty slopes of the Dardanelles. Yet when he enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force in 1914, his exceptional eyesight and natural shooting ability quickly distinguished him from his peers. Gallipoli's broken terrain, with its steep ravines, sparse scrub, and exposed ridgelines, created a sniper's paradise for those with sufficient skill and daring. At Quinn's Post, perhaps the most contested section of the Anzac Line, Singh established his deadly reputation. Operating from carefully constructed hides, often with minimal cover, he methodically eliminated Turkish soldiers who exposed themselves even momentarily. His success came from absolute stillness, wrote his spotter, Ion Jack Idrius, in later memoirs. He could remain motionless for hours, barely seeming to breathe, until the perfect shot presented itself. This patience allowed Singh to establish positions that conventional military wisdom would have deemed too exposed. Where others required substantial cover, he created advantage through sheer immobility. Singh's growing effectiveness eventually prompted the Turkish command to deploy their own specialist to eliminate him, a marksman known to the Australians as Abdul the Terrible. This initiated one of the Great War's most famous sniper duels, conducted over several weeks across the sun-baked slopes. Each man studied the other's habits, attempting to identify patterns that might reveal a moment of vulnerability. The duel's conclusion came at dawn, after Singh had remained in position throughout the night, anticipating his opponent's morning routine. As the Turkish sniper began his daily observation, Singh's bullet found him. Australian stretcher-bearers later reported that the man had been shot through his periscope sight, an extraordinary demonstration of precision under combat conditions. By the time the Gallipoli campaign ended in evacuation, Singh's official tally stood at more than 200 confirmed Turkish casualties. Some accounts place the actual number considerably higher, but verification challenges in the chaotic peninsula made exact figures impossible to establish. Regardless of the precise count, Singh had become the most lethal sniper in the Anzac forces, earning the nickname the Assassin from admiring comrades. Despite being awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal and receiving personal congratulations from General William Birdwood, Singh's most significant recognition came from an unexpected source. Turkish commanders, acknowledging his exceptional skill, referred to the area he controlled as Singh's Valley in their own reports, a rare tribute from those who suffered most from his deadly accuracy. After Gallipoli, Singh served on the Western Front, where different terrain and tactical situations somewhat limited his effectiveness. He suffered multiple wounds and gas exposure before being sent home to Australia in 1918, his body broken by the war that had made him famous. The peace that followed brought Billy Singh no comfort or prosperity. Despite his wartime fame, He returned to a country still bound by the White Australia policy, where his Chinese heritage remained a barrier to opportunity. He drifted between jobs, attempted gold prospecting, and briefly tried farming before illness and financial troubles overwhelmed him. Jack Idries, whose accounts preserved much of Singh's wartime story, described visiting his former comrade in the 1930s. He found the once legendary marksman living in a small room in Brisbane, surrounded by fading newspaper clippings, paper memories of a time when his particular skills had been valued rather than his ethnicity questioned. His hands still steady, Idries noted sadly, but with nothing left to aim at. Billy Singh died in 1943, largely forgotten by the nation he had served. His funeral was attended by only a handful of people, and he was buried in an unmarked grave, a final indignity for a man once celebrated as a national hero. It would be decades before Australia began reassessing his contributions and acknowledging both his exceptional military service and the discrimination he faced despite it. Today, a modest memorial stands in his hometown of Claremont, Queensland, finally acknowledging the quiet marksman whose steady hands once held the line at Quinn's Post. His story has become emblematic of both the Anzac martial tradition and the complex racial history of Australia, the assassin from Gallipoli, who returned to find himself still an outsider in the country he had helped defend. Legend or lore? SULO KOLKKA. The vast Finnish forests, where winter darkness stretches for 20 hours and temperatures plunge to deadly extremes, produced a different breed of sniper. Among them, none generated more controversy or contradictory accounts than SULO KOLKKA, a figure who exists in the shadowy borderland between documented history and national mythology. When the Soviet Union invaded Finland in November 1939, launching what became known as the Winter War, the vastly outnumbered Finnish forces relied on intimate knowledge of their terrain and superior fieldcraft to counter overwhelming Soviet numerical advantages. Snipers became the forest's silent guardians, striking from invisible positions and vanishing before counterattacks could find them. According to military records, KOLKKA served with the 6th Division in Eastern Karelia during both the Winter War and the subsequent Continuation War. Beyond these basic facts, his story splinters into competing narratives. Finnish accounts credit him with over 400 confirmed Soviet casualties, a staggering number that would place him among history's deadliest marksmen. Yet verification of these figures remains elusive, lost in the chaos of forest skirmishes fought in near-total isolation. The deep forest keeps its own counsel. A Finnish military historian noted when discussing KOLKKA's disputed record, "When a man fires a shot kilometers from any witness, who can say with certainty what occurred?" This fundamental challenge of confirmation plagued record-keeping throughout the Finnish-Soviet conflicts, particularly for soldiers operating alone in remote sectors. Unlike urban warfare or trench combat, where observers could verify kills relatively easily, the forest battles where KOLKKA operated often left bodies undiscovered until spring thaws revealed what winter had hidden. This natural cycle of concealment and revelation created perfect conditions for both genuine accomplishment and mythological expansion. What seems certain from surviving accounts is that KOLKKA employed techniques uniquely adapted to the northern forests. Finnish snipers developed a distinctive approach called MOTI, isolating small enemy units by eliminating their communications personnel first, then methodically reducing their numbers until survivors attempted retreat, exposing themselves to waiting rifles. KOLKKA reportedly preferred not traditional hides but elevated positions in the forest canopy. Climbing into the dense branches of ancient pines, he would create small platforms camouflaged with boughs and snow. From these perches, he commanded shooting lanes along Soviet approach routes while remaining virtually undetectable from ground level. The extreme cold required extraordinary discipline, remaining motionless for hours in temperatures that could freeze exposed skin in minutes. His weapon was the standard-issue Finnish Mosin Nagant M28-30, a domestic improvement on the Russian design that featured superior sights and barrel quality. Finnish armorers had refined this rifle specifically for accuracy in Arctic conditions, creating an implement perfectly suited to the methodical hunting of men through snow-laden forests. The question that continues to divide military historians isn't whether KOLKKA was effective. All accounts agree on his exceptional skill, but rather the scale of that effectiveness. Some researchers suggest his actual confirmed kills numbered closer to 250, still placing him among the war's most accomplished snipers. Others maintain that the higher figure accurately reflects his impact, but suffered from documentation challenges inherent to forest warfare. Perhaps more significant than the numbers themselves is what KOLKKA represents in Finnish national memory. During the desperate days when Soviet forces threatened to overwhelm their smaller neighbor, stories of exceptional marksmen provided crucial moral support. The image of the solitary Finnish sniper, moving like a forest spirit through territories the enemy considered secured, became a powerful symbol of resistance against overwhelming odds. "Some legends are necessary," a Finnish veteran observed when questioned about KOLKKA's exploits. "When facing an enemy who measures strength in divisions, sometimes you need to believe in the power of the individual." This psychological dimension, the way KOLKKA's reputation affected both Finnish morale and Soviet apprehension, may represent his most significant contribution regardless of the precise body count. After the war, KOLKKA reportedly returned to civilian life as a forestry worker, continuing his close relationship with the woodlands that had sheltered his lethal work. Like many Finnish veterans, he maintained near-total silence regarding his wartime experiences, neither confirming nor denying the growing legends attached to his name. This reticence only fueled further speculation and mythologizing. When KOLKKA died in the early 1980s, he left behind no memoirs, no interviews, no definitive accounting of his accomplishments. This absence of personal testimony created a vacuum that Finnish cultural memory filled with increasing elaboration. The silent sniper became a vessel for national trauma and triumph, a figure whose exploits helped process the collective experience of a small nation that had faced annihilation yet survived. Today, military academies study the Finnish sniper techniques developed during these conflicts, acknowledging their profound influence on modern special operations doctrine. Whether KOLKKA personally accounted for 250 or 400 casualties has become less relevant than the tactical innovations he helped pioneer, the integration of extreme environmental conditions into strategic advantage, the psychological impact of precision strikes on enemy morale, and the multiplication of combat effectiveness through perfect terrain adaptation. SULO KOLKKA thus remains in that liminal space between documented history and national legend, a figure whose actual achievements may never be precisely quantified, but whose symbolic importance transcends mere numbers. In the snowy silence of the Finnish forests, his ghost still moves, embodying the quiet determination of a nation that refused to disappear beneath the weight of invasion. Long Shot No. 4, Rob Furlong. The thin air of Afghanistan's Shah-i-Kot Valley carries sound differently than the dense atmosphere at sea level. Bullets travel farther, drop less, and retain lethal energy across distances that would render them harmless in more common environments. On a frigid March morning in 2002, Master Corporal Rob Furlong of the Canadian Armed Forces discovered exactly how these atmospheric physics could extend the reach of his .50 caliber Macmillan TAC-50 rifle. Operation Anaconda had brought American and coalition forces into the valley to flush out Taliban and Al-Qaeda fighters entrenched in mountain positions. As dawn broke across the jagged peaks, Furlong and his two-man team spotter and a security element occupied an observation post on a ridge overlooking Taliban movements. At 430 meters away, just over 1.5 miles, enemy combatants believed themselves completely beyond the range of conventional small arms fire. Distance creates a false sense of security, Furlong later explained to military trainees. But physics doesn't care about what you believe is possible. This philosophical approach informed the mathematical precision with which he approached the shot that would temporarily set a world record for the longest confirmed sniper kill in military history. The preparation for such an extraordinary engagement required calculations that went far beyond basic marksmanship. At extreme distances, the curvature of the Earth becomes a ballistic factor. The rotation of the planet creates a Coriolis effect that pushes bullets slightly off course. Even the temperature gradient between the shooter's position and the target must be accounted for. Furlong and his spotter spent nearly 20 minutes methodically processing these variables before attempting the shot. The valley's altitude, approximately 700 meters above sea level, meant roughly 30% less atmospheric density than at sea level, significantly reducing drag on the massive .50 caliber projectile. Meanwhile, the early morning conditions created a temperature inversion that further stabilized the bullet's path. "You don't actually aim at what you see," Furlong would later tell military students. "You aim at where mathematics tells you the target will intersect with your bullet. This intersection, calculated through experience and intuition as much as formal ballistics, required estimating wind speed across multiple points in the bullet's flight path journey that would take nearly 4 seconds from muzzle to impact. After 2 ranging shots that fell short, Furlong made a final adjustment. His third round struck the enemy combatant in the chest, a hit confirmed by both his spotter through high-powered optics and subsequently by troops who secured the area. The shot temporarily established a new world record for the longest confirmed sniper kill, a distance that many ballistics experts had previously considered beyond the effective range of even the powerful .50 BMG cartridge. The weapon system that made this feat possible represented the cutting edge of sniper technology at that time. The Macmillan TAC-50 combined a match-grade barrel with a fiberglass stock designed to minimize thermal expansion and contraction. The Schmidt Bender 525-56 scope provided exceptional clarity even at extreme magnification. Yet even with this advanced equipment, such a shot would have been impossible without Furlong's extraordinary ability to read environmental conditions and translate them into precise mechanical adjustments. Throughout the remainder of Operation Anaconda, Furlong and his team continued providing overwatch for coalition forces, though none of their subsequent engagements would match the historical significance of that single long-distance shot. The military significance extended beyond the elimination of one enemy combatant. It demonstrated that coalition forces could project precise lethal force at distances previously considered safe havens for opposing forces. Upon returning to Canada, Furlong maintained the professional modesty characteristic of elite special operations personnel. Unlike some modern snipers who have embraced public recognition, he initially avoided publicity about his record-setting shot. "The distance makes for interesting conversation," he once told a military publication, "but it doesn't change the fundamental responsibility of the job." After leaving military service, Furlong transitioned to law enforcement, serving as a police officer in Edmonton, Alberta. This continuation of public service reflected the disciplined professionalism that had characterized his military career. Eventually, he began offering limited marksmanship training, sharing his expertise with both law enforcement agencies and civilian shooting enthusiasts through carefully structured programs. His teaching philosophy emphasizes that extraordinary shots result not from dramatic technique, but from meticulous attention to fundamentals executed under challenging conditions. Students describe his instruction as methodical, with particular focus on environmental reading, the ability to observe and interpret how atmospheric conditions will affect ballistic performance. The record that Furlong established would stand for nearly 7 years before being surpassed by another Canadian sniper in 2009. Yet the mathematical and atmospheric principles he demonstrated remain fundamental to extreme long-distance marksmanship. Modern military snipers study his Shah-e-Kot Valley shot as a case study in applied ballistics, particularly the complex interplay between equipment capabilities and environmental factors. Rob Furlong's legacy isn't measured merely in the remarkable distance of his most famous shot, but in how that achievement expanded the conceptual boundaries of precision combat. The thin mountain air that carried his bullet across an unprecedented distance also carried forward a new understanding of what was possible at the intersection of human skill, advanced technology, and perfect environmental conditions. Britannia's Reach, Craig Harrison. The chalky dust of Helmand Province hangs perpetually in the air, creating a haze that distorts perception and transforms solid objects into wavering mirages. In this visual soup, distances become nearly impossible to judge accurately. Yet, on a November morning in 2009, Corporal of Horse Craig Harrison of Britain's Household Cavalry Regiment defied these conditions to establish what was then a new world record for long-distance marksmanship. Harrison's journey to Afghanistan began in the disciplined traditions of the British Army's mounted regiments, where precision and control are valued above all else. Though he entered military service without an exceptional shooting background, the institutional emphasis on marksmanship fundamentals provided fertile ground for his natural aptitude to develop. By the time he deployed to Helmand, Harrison had transformed himself into one of the British Army's premier snipers. The morning of his record-setting engagement found Harrison providing overwatch for a patrol near the town of Musa Qala, a Taliban stronghold that had seen fierce fighting throughout the coalition presence. From his elevated position, Harrison observed through his scope as two Taliban machine gunners established a firing position to ambush the approaching patrol. The distance later measured precisely at 475 meters, or about 1.54 mile, succeeded the effective range of his lone 115A3 rifle by nearly 1,000 meters. The mathematics said it shouldn't work, Harrison later recounted in a rare interview. But sometimes circumstances align perfectly. These circumstances included unusually still air, consistent temperature, and a firing position that allowed for perfect stability. Even with these advantages, the shot required compensating for bullet drop that would exceed 15 meters. The projectile would need to be launched at a significant upward angle to arc down onto the target after nearly 6 seconds of flight time. Harrison and his spotter, studying the heat mirage through their optics, developed a firing solution based on observed conditions rather than theoretical ballistics. "You learn to read mirage like a language," he explained. "The way it bends tells you what the air is doing between you and the target." This intuitive understanding of atmospheric effects allowed him to make adjustments that went beyond what the ballistic tables for his rifle would suggest. After confirming his calculations with his spotter, Harrison fired a carefully aimed shot at the first machine gunner. Following the trace of the bullet through his scope, he observed the strike and immediately transitioned to the second target, eliminating him with another single round. The patrol below, initially unaware of the threat, continued safely while Harrison maintained his position. The rifle that made this extraordinary feat possible was the lone 115A3, known in civilian markets as the Arctic Warfare Super Magnum. Chambered in 338 Lapua Magnum, it represented a sweet spot between the portability of standard sniper rifles and the massive long-range capability of heavier 50 caliber systems. The Schmidt Bender 525 PM6 PM2 scope provided exceptional clarity even at extreme distances. Yet even with this sophisticated equipment, the shot exceeded the weapon's designed maximum effective range by approximately 35%. Military ballistics experts who later analyzed the engagement pointed to a rare confluence of environmental factors. The high Afghan plateau reduced atmospheric density, allowing the bullet to maintain velocity longer than at sea level. The early morning timing meant perfectly still air before daily heating created thermal currents. Perhaps most importantly, Harrison's firing position sat at a slightly higher elevation than the target, creating a trajectory that worked with gravity rather than entirely against it during the bullet's long flight. "There was mirth in the mathematics," Harrison later wrote, using an unexpected poetic turn to describe the elegant geometry that connected his muzzle to the distant target. This intersection of art and science, of intuition and calculation, characterizes the rarefied skill set of elite snipers operating at the limits of ballistic possibility. The psychological impact of Harrison's shot extended far beyond the elimination of 2 enemy combatants. Taliban fighters in the region, who had previously considered themselves safe beyond 500 meters, suddenly faced the unsettling reality that distance no longer guaranteed security. The knowledge that they could be struck with precision from positions they couldn't even identify created what military psychologists call area denial through psychological operation, territory controlled not through physical presence, but through the fear of unseen observation. Harrison's return to civilian life proved more challenging than the extraordinary shot that made him famous. Like many combat veterans, he struggled with post-traumatic stress disorder, experiencing flashbacks and difficulty reintegrating into society where his specialized skills had limited application. In his published memoir, he described this transition with the same analytical precision he once applied to long-distance shooting. Finding healing through an unexpected source, Harrison established a small horse breeding operation on the English moorlands. The daily rhythm of caring for these animals, he explained, provided both purpose and therapy. Horses don't care about what you've done or seen, he noted. They respond to patience and steady hands, the same qualities that made me effective behind a rifle. Today, Harrison occasionally provides specialized training for military and law enforcement units, sharing his expertise in environmental reading and extreme distance engagement. His teaching emphasizes that extraordinary shots result not from equipment, but from the shooter's ability to interpret atmospheric conditions and translate them into mechanical adjustments. Craig Harrison's legacy extends beyond his record-setting shot to his candidness about both the technical challenges of extreme marksmanship and the psychological cost of deployment. In breaking his silence about post-traumatic stress, he helped normalize these conversations within military communities, traditionally reluctant to acknowledge mental health challenges. The distance record that briefly bore his name has since been surpassed, but his contribution to both the art of long-range shooting and the understanding of its human consequences remains undiminished. The Devil of Ramadi, Chris Kyle. The flat expanse of West Texas ranch country, where heat ripples across mesquite scrubland and distances deceive the untrained eye, shaped Chris Kyle long before he donned a military uniform. Born in 1974 to a church deacon and a Sunday school teacher, Kyle absorbed lessons about marksmanship and responsibility that would later define his military career. "My dad made one thing clear from the beginning," Kyle later wrote in his autobiography. "If I wanted to hunt, I needed to understand the animal, respect its life, and make clean kills." This ethical framework, combining lethal effectiveness with moral purpose, followed Kyle from those childhood hunts into the dusty streets of Iraq, where he would become the deadliest sniper in American military history. Kyle's path to the military wasn't direct. After high school, he worked as a professional bronco rider until an arm injury ended that career. At 25, older than most recruits, he joined the Navy with the specific goal of becoming a SEAL. Despite being initially rejected due to the pins in his injured arm, Kyle's persistence earned him a second medical evaluation and eventual acceptance into the demanding selection program. BUD/S, Basic Underwater Demolition, SEAL, training is notorious for its attrition rate, with typically fewer than 30% of candidates completing the course. Kyle not only endured but excelled, demonstrating the stubborn resilience that would later sustain him through 4 combat deployments. His marksmanship instructors quickly recognized his natural talent, though the full measure of his shooting ability wouldn't become apparent until he faced combat conditions. When Kyle deployed to Iraq in 2003, he carried a standard-issue M40A3 sniper rifle. This bolt-action system, chambered in 7.6 2-chown 51mm NATO, had been the backbone of Marine Corps sniper operations since Vietnam. For closer urban engagements, he often preferred the semi-automatic Mark 12 special-purpose rifle, which offered faster follow-up shots when multiple targets presented themselves. "The rifle is just a tool," he frequently reminded younger snipers under his mentorship. "It's your decisions that actually save lives." This perspective viewing the sniper's role primarily as protective rather than aggressive shaped Kyle's approach throughout his deployments. While media accounts often focused on his kill count, Kyle himself emphasized the defensive nature of his work, speaking more about the American service members he protected than the enemy combatants he eliminated. During the Second Battle of Fallujah in 2004, Kyle performed what many military analysts consider his most significant operational achievement. Positioned on rooftops throughout the urban battlefield, he provided overwatch for Marine units clearing buildings below. His precision fire neutralized threats before they could engage friendly forces, fundamentally altering the tactical equation of urban combat. The relationship between Kyle and his regular spotter, Ryan Dorber-Jobe, exemplified the deep bonds formed in sniper teams. Operating in two-man elements, often isolated from larger units, snipers develop partnerships based on absolute trust and complementary skills. Job's exceptional ability to identify potential threats and calculate environmental conditions perfectly complemented Kyle's natural shooting talent. Together, they developed a nearly telepathic communication system that allowed them to engage targets with minimal verbal exchange. By the conclusion of his 4 deployments, Kyle had accumulated 160 confirmed kills, the highest total in American military history. Military historians note that the confirmation process, which requires witnessed and documented eliminations, likely undercounts his actual impact. Kyle himself estimated his total at closer to 255, though he maintained that the specific number was less important than the protective purpose behind each shot. The psychological toll of this lethal work manifested in complex ways. Unlike some snipers who developed emotional detachment as a coping mechanism, Kyle maintained a clear moral framework that justified his actions within the context of protecting fellow service members. "I don't shoot people for fun," he insisted in interviews. "I shoot them to protect my guys, period." Upon returning to civilian life in 2009, Kyle struggled with the common challenges of military transition. The hypervigilance that kept him alive in combat zones proved difficult to deactivate in suburban Texas. Nightmares and flashbacks interrupted his sleep. Mundane civilian problems seemed trivial compared to life-or-death decisions he had faced regularly for years. Finding purpose through helping others, Kyle co-founded Fitco Cares, now the Chris Kyle Frog Foundation, a non-profit organization providing therapeutic equipment to veterans struggling with physical and psychological injuries. He discovered that mentoring fellow veterans provided similar satisfaction to his protective role as a sniper, channeling his skills toward healing rather than harm. Kyle's approach to veteran outreach included practical activities that allowed former service members to process trauma through shared experience rather than clinical settings. Taking veterans shooting or hunting created comfortable environments where they could gradually discuss difficult experiences with someone who understood without judgment. This peer support model has since been adopted by numerous veteran organizations. The tragic irony of Kyle's death in 2013, shot at a Texas gun range by a troubled veteran he was trying to help, added a somber coda to his story. The man who had survived multiple combat tours, including being shot twice and involved in 6 IED explosions, lost his life trying to assist another warrior's healing journey. Chris Kyle's legacy extends far beyond his battlefield accomplishments. His best-selling autobiography and the subsequent film adaptation brought public attention to both the technical precision of modern sniping and the psychological complexity of its practitioners. Military training programs continue studying his techniques, particularly his methods for rapid target acquisition in urban environments and his disciplined approach to shoot, no-shoot decisions under pressure. Perhaps more significantly, Kyle's post-service advocacy helped transform public perception of combat veterans, particularly those struggling with post-traumatic stress. By speaking openly about his own challenges while demonstrating continued purpose and capability, he challenged stereotypes and created space for more nuanced conversations about the warrior's return to society. The Devil of Ramadi, as Iraqi insurgents called him, ultimately found his greatest impact, not through the precision of his rifle but through the purpose he discovered in helping fellow veterans navigate the difficult terrain between military service and civilian life, a different kind of civilo Overwatch mission that continues through the foundation that bears his name. The Reaper, Nicholas Irving. The concrete jungle of East Baltimore provided an unlikely training ground for one of America's most effective snipers. Nicholas Irving grew up learning different kinds of survival skills than those typically associated with military marksmen. Street awareness, constant vigilance, and the ability to read subtle human behaviors became second nature long before he touched a precision rifle. Urban environments teach you to notice patterns, Irving later explained to military trainees, who belongs where, how people move when they're comfortable versus when they're not. Those same observations keep you alive in combat zones. This intuitive understanding of human behavior would later distinguish Irving's approach to battlefield reconnaissance and targeting. Joining the Army in 2004, Irving initially trained as an infantryman before his marksmanship scores opened the door to sniper school. Unlike some who struggled with the psychological aspects of the role, Irving displayed a natural composure that allowed him to operate effectively under extreme pressure. Instructors noted his unusual ability to maintain normal respiratory and heart rates even during high-stress scenarios. By the time he deployed to Afghanistan's Helmand province in 2009, Irving had developed a distinctive approach to his craft. While most snipers operate almost exclusively during daylight hours when visibility is optimal, he specialized in nighttime operations, leveraging advanced optics to observe and engage targets when they believed themselves concealed by darkness. His weapon of choice reflected this specialized role. Rather than the bolt-action rifles preferred by many snipers for their mechanical reliability and accuracy, Irving primarily used a semi-automatic SR-25 rifle that he nicknamed Dirty Diana. This system, chambered in 7.6 2.50 1mm NATO, offered faster follow-up shots when engaging multiple targets, a significant advantage during the fluid engagements characteristic of his deployment. "The rifle chooses its master," Irving would later write, describing the almost symbiotic relationship between marksman and weapon. The personification of his rifle wasn't mere sentimentality but reflected the deep familiarity necessary when operating at the limits of human performance. Every subtle mechanical characteristic, from trigger brake to recoil pattern, became extensions of his own nervous system. During a single 3-month deployment rotation, Irving accumulated 33 confirmed kills, an extraordinary total considering the relatively short time frame. Military analysts attribute this effectiveness to his innovative integration of night vision technology with traditional sniper fieldcraft. By operating when enemy forces felt most secure, he created a psychological advantage that multiplied his tactical impact. Irving's techniques for maintaining physical stability under stress became legendary within special operations circles. He developed a breathing methodology that synchronized his respiratory rhythm with his heartbeat, creating micro-moments of perfect stillness between pulses. This physiological control allowed for precision shooting under conditions where most marksmen would struggle to maintain basic accuracy. "Your body sends signals before your conscious mind recognizes danger," he explained in a rare instructional session. Learning to read those signals without being controlled by them separates good shooters from great ones. This mindfulness approach maintaining awareness of physiological responses without being governed by them represented an evolution in sniper training that moved beyond mechanical skills into psychological mastery. The toll of combat operations eventually manifested in ways Irving hadn't anticipated. After returning from deployment, he experienced the familiar symptoms of post-traumatic stress, hypervigilance, intrusive memories, and difficulty reintegrating into environments that suddenly seemed unpredictably dangerous. Rather than concealing these struggles, Irving made the unusual choice to document them openly. His transition from operator to author began with his memoir, The Reaper, which offered unprecedented insight into both the technical aspects of modern special operations sniping and the psychological complexity of the role. Unlike previous generations of snipers who often maintained lifetime silence about their experiences, Irving chose transparency as a path toward both personal healing and public education. This openness extended to his advocacy for mindfulness practices among veterans. Drawing from his combat breathing techniques, Irving developed simplified methods for stress management that required no special equipment or esoteric knowledge, just the same focused attention to physiological signals that had made him effective behind a rifle. "Precision isn't just about shooting," he frequently tells veterans struggling with transition. "It's about precisely understanding your own responses and choosing which ones deserve action." This application of sniper principles to civilian challenges has proven particularly effective for former service members navigating post-military life. As a military analyst and commentator, Irving brings unique perspective to discussions of modern warfare. His emphasis on the human dimension of combat operations show psychological factors influence tactical decision shahs, influenced training protocols beyond sniper schools to include broader special operations preparation. The Reaper's legacy extends beyond his impressive but brief combat record to encompass his willingness to transform private experience into public education. By articulating the previously unspoken psychological dimensions of precision combat Nicholas Irving helped create space for more nuanced understanding of both the technical and human requirements of modern warfare. Today, Irving continues sharing his expertise through limited training programs and media appearances, always emphasizing that the most critical skills in high-pressure situations have little to do with equipment and everything to do with self-mastery. The street-smart kid from Baltimore who became one of America's deadliest snipers ultimately found his greatest impact not through his trigger finger but through his voice. Sheikh of snipers, Abu Tahsin al-SALHI. The date groves of southern Iraq, where sunlight filters through feathery palms to create shifting patterns of light and shadow, taught young Tahsin al-SALHI his first lessons in patience and observation. Born in 1953 near Basra, he belonged to a generation that would witness their homeland transformed repeatedly by conflict, from the Iran-Iraq War through the Gulf Wars and ultimately the rise of ISIS. Unlike most modern snipers, whose careers span a single conflict or perhaps a decade of service, al-SALHI's remarkable story stretched across 5 decades and multiple wars. His first combat experience came during the 1973 Arab-Israeli War, where he served as a young conscript. By the time he faced ISIS fighters in 2014, he had become an elderly man with a snow-white beard that earned him the nickname Sheikh of Snipers among younger militiamen. "Age brings calm to the trigger finger," he once told a journalist who questioned whether his elderly status diminished his effectiveness. "Young men shoot with emotion. Old men shoot with calculation." This philosophical approach to marksmanship distinguished al-SALHI from his younger counterparts, who often marveled at his ability to remain motionless for hours, seemingly impervious to physical discomfort. When ISIS seized vast territories across Iraq and Syria in 2014, the 70-year-old al-SALHI volunteered with the Popular Mobilization Forces, a coalition of predominantly Shia militias formed to combat the extremist group. Despite his age, his lifetime of marksmanship experience made him an invaluable asset, particularly for training younger snipers in fieldcraft techniques developed across decades of conflict. Al-SALHI preferred simplicity in his equipment. While younger snipers often utilized modern rifles with advanced optics, he remained faithful to his Dragunov SVD, a Soviet-designed semi-automatic sniper rifle he had first used in the 1970s. This weapon, with its distinctive wooden furniture and 4x PSO1 optical sight, represented older technology but perfectly suited his methodical approach to engagement. His most distinctive physical characteristic beyond his age was the green scarf he wore wrapped around his neck during operations. Young militiamen attributed various superstitions to this garment, claiming it made him invisible to enemy optics or prevented enemy bullets from finding their mark. Al-SALHI himself offered a simpler explanation. "It was a gift from my wife many years ago. I promised her I would return home wearing it." Between 2014 and 2017, al-SALHI reportedly eliminated 320 ISIS fighters, operating primarily in the palm groves and small villages surrounding Tikrit. Unlike younger snipers who often sought to maximize body counts, he approached his work with the patient deliberation of a craftsman, sometimes spending days observing a single area before taking a shot. "The bullet is merely the period at the end of a very long sentence," he explained to younger militiamen. "The sentence begins with observation." This emphasis on pre-engagement preparation reflected lessons learned across multiple conflicts, where he had witnessed how hastiness often led to missed opportunities or unnecessary exposure. What made al-SALHI particularly valuable to the anti-ISIS coalition wasn't merely his individual effectiveness, but his willingness to share knowledge with a new generation. Young militia snipers described informal classes conducted in makeshift forward positions, where the elderly marksman would patiently explain concepts like windage, bullet drop, and thermal scope management, while brewing strong Iraqi tea over small fires. His teaching style combined technical precision with folksy metaphors drawn from agricultural life. He compared adjusting for wind to planting seeds in rows despite the breeze, and described range estimation as measuring a field with your eyes instead of your feet. These accessible explanations helped bridge the gap between formal ballistic science and practical application for fighters with limited formal education. The calm demeanor that distinguished al-Salhi in combat extended to his interactions with international journalists who occasionally visited militia positions. When asked how he reconciled taking lives with his religious beliefs, he replied with characteristic directness, "ISIS came to destroy everything we consider sacred. Protecting the innocent from monsters requires clean hands but absolute resolve." In September 2017, al-Salhi's remarkable run came to an end during operations near Hawija in northern Iraq. While providing overwatch for advancing militia forces from a hilltop position, he was reportedly killed by ISIS fighters who had detected his location. The exact circumstances remain disputed, with some accounts suggesting he continued firing despite being wounded, covering the retreat of younger comrades. News of his death spread rapidly through Iraqi social media, generating an outpouring of tributes that transcended sectarian divisions. His funeral in Basra drew thousands of mourners, including militia members, government officials, and ordinary citizens who had come to see the elderly sniper as a symbol of indigenous resistance against foreign extremism. The green scarf that had become his trademark was buried with him, fulfilling in death the promise he had made to his wife years earlier. According to local tradition, small pieces of similar green fabric were distributed to young snipers who had trained under him, creating a visual lineage that connected his methods to a new generation of marksmen. Sheikh of snipers Abu Tashin al-Salhi embodied a different dimension of the sniper's role than most Western counterparts, the wisdom figure who combines lethal skill with mentorship. His story demonstrates how the modern battlefield still has space for elderly warriors whose experience can sometimes overcome the physical advantages of youth. In the date palm groves where he once hunted Iraq's enemies, younger marksmen still speak his name with reverence, continuing traditions of patience and precision that transcend the technological evolution of warfare. Shadows and records. Beyond the documented exploits and verified tallies lie countless unnamed precision marksmen whose work remains deliberately obscured by operational security, political sensitivity, or personal choice. For every sniper whose achievements enter historical record, dozens more operate in shadows so complete that even their basic existence remains officially unacknowledged. The classified operations of special forces units worldwide have produced remarkable feats of marksmanship that will likely remain undocumented for decades, if ever revealed at all. The nature of counter-terrorism and intelligence operations often necessitates that even extraordinary accomplishments remain known only to immediate team members and select commanders. Military historians note the statistical impossibility that the highest-scoring snipers are all publicly known. Political considerations frequently determine which precision shooters receive recognition and which remain anonymous. Nations with robust public relations capabilities tend to produce well-documented sniper legends, while equally skilled marksmen from countries with different media approaches fade into historical obscurity. The veracity of kill counts themselves presents another methodological challenge. Different military organizations employ vastly different standards for confirming and attributing enemy casualties. Some require multiple witnesses and physical verification, while others accept reports based on optical observation alone. These inconsistent standards make direct numerical comparisons between snipers from different conflicts or nations inherently problematic. "The number is never the measure of the marksman," observed a former sniper instructor at the U.S. Army Sniper School. Some of history's most important precision shots were single, unrepeated events that changed battle outcomes more significantly than 100 routine eliminations. This quality versus quantity perspective challenges the traditional emphasis on cumulative tallies as the primary metric of sniper effectiveness. Contemporary military doctrine increasingly recognizes the sniper's role beyond mere elimination of enemy personnel. Modern precision marksmen serve as intelligence gatherers, forward observers for artillery and air support, and psychological operation assets. This multi-dimensional approach makes simple numerical assessments increasingly obsolete as measures of operational value. The technological evolution of precision shooting continues accelerating, with computerized fire control systems, advanced ballistic calculators, and extended-range ammunition pushing the boundaries of what constitutes marksmanship versus weapons system operation. As computers increasingly calculate solutions that human marksmen once determined, through experience and intuition, the fundamental nature of sniping itself undergoes transformation. Yet despite these technological advances, military trainers emphasize that the core psychological attributes remain consistent across centuries: patience, emotional control, decisive judgment, and moral clarity. The mathematical precision of modern equipment cannot replace the human decision-maker behind the optic, determining when to press the trigger and, equally important, when to refrain. The ethical dimension of precision killing receives increasing attention in contemporary military discourse. Modern snipers undergo extensive training in battlefield law and proportionality considerations that would have seemed foreign to their historical counterparts. The modern precision marksman operates within complex legal and moral frameworks that extend far beyond simple technical proficiency. As warfare continues evolving toward greater emphasis on precision over mass effects, the sniper's role likely expands rather than diminishes. The marksman who can neutralize specific threats while minimizing collateral damage represents the intersection of political necessity and tactical reality in modern conflicts. This targeted approach aligns with both legal requirements and strategic communication needs of contemporary military operations. The legends examined throughout this history, from the mountain shepherds of Austria to the elderly sheikh in Iraqi palm groves, represent not merely exceptional individuals but the evolution of a specialized military discipline. Their techniques, equipment, and psychological approaches chart the development of precision warfare across diverse environments and historical contexts. What unites these disparate figures isn't merely technical skill but the capacity to operate effectively in the uniquely isolated psychological space that defines the sniper's experience. Unlike most military specialties that emphasize team coordination and shared burden, the precision marksman typically faces both tactical challenges and moral consequences in relative solitude. This psychological dimension, more than equipment or technique, defines the true heritage of history's deadliest snipers. Ethical dimensions. The sniper occupies an unusual moral space in military ethics, the practitioner of a discipline that involves direct, personally attributable killing, yet typically at distances that eliminate immediate physical risk. This asymmetry creates distinctive psychological and ethical dimensions not present in other forms of combat engagement. Military ethicists have long debated whether distance diminishes moral responsibility. Traditional warrior ethics, dating back to ancient civilizations, often emphasized the moral virtue of facing enemies at equal risk. The sniper, however, deliberately maximizes the distance advantage, specifically to eliminate reciprocal danger. This fundamental asymmetry creates what philosopher Dave Grossman terms mechanical distance, a physical and emotional separation that potentially makes killing psychologically easier. The distance isn't merely physical, noted a military chaplain who worked extensively with returning snipers. It's perceptual. Through a scope, the human becomes a target detailed enough to engage precisely, but abstract enough to compartmentalize emotionally. This perceptual transformation represents both a tactical advantage and a potential psychological hazard, allowing necessary detachment that can sometimes extend beyond the battlefield. Yet paradoxically, snipers often report more direct moral engagement with their actions than other combatants. Unlike artillery crews or bomber pilots, who rarely witness the direct consequences of their attacks, precision marksmen typically observe the immediate effects of their shots through powerful optics. This visual confirmation creates a more concrete connection between action and outcome than many other military specialties experience. Further complicating the ethical landscape is the sniper's traditional focus on leadership targeting. Since the discipline's formalization, precision marksmen have prioritized enemy officers, radio operators, and specialized personnel over conventional infantry. This selective approach aligns with utilitarian military ethics, maximizing tactical impact while potentially minimizing overall casualties, but raises questions about personalized killing that other military operations often avoid. "I knew their faces before I knew their fall," wrote one Vietnam-era sniper in a private journal, expressing the unsettling intimacy that extended observation creates. Unlike conventional engagements where enemies remain largely anonymous, snipers often study their targets for hours or days before taking action, creating a one-sided familiarity that can haunt practitioners long after deployments end. Modern military training increasingly addresses these ethical complexities directly. Where previous generations received primarily technical instruction, contemporary sniper schools incorporate specific modules on ethical decision-making, proportionality assessment, and psychological resilience. This evolution reflects growing recognition that technical proficiency alone proves insufficient preparation for the moral weight the role carries. The formalization of rules of engagement has significantly impacted sniper operations across most Western militaries. Where historical marksmen often operated with considerable autonomy regarding target selection, modern snipers typically work within strictly defined parameters that dictate which threats justify lethal force. These constraints aim to align tactical necessity with legal requirements while providing clear frameworks for individual decision-making. Different religious and cultural traditions have developed varied approaches to reconciling precision killing with broader moral frameworks. Some snipers report finding ethical clarity through spiritual practices that contextualize their actions within larger purposes of protection and prevention. Others maintain strictly compartmentalized separation between their military role and personal identity, creating psychological boundaries between the person who takes life and the one who returns to civilian society. Perhaps most significant is the evolution away from valorizing high kill counts toward emphasizing restraint and selectivity. Modern military doctrine increasingly evaluates sniper effectiveness through more nuanced metrics: intelligence gathered, operations enabled, or areas effectively denied to enemy forces. This shift reflects both ethical maturation and tactical reality recognition that the sniper's true value extends far beyond simple elimination tallies. As one instructor at the US Army Sniper School tells students, "Anyone can learn to shoot. We're teaching you when not to." This emphasis on judgment over mere technical execution represents the ethical frontier of precision warfare, the recognition that the most important decisions happen before the trigger breaks, in the silent moral calculations that distinguish necessary force from merely possible action. The ethical questions surrounding sniping reflect broader tensions in modern warfare between tactical necessity and humanitarian constraints, between individual responsibility and institutional authorization, between the ancient warrior tradition and contemporary legal frameworks. As military technology continues creating greater distance between combatants, the sniper's long-established navigation of these tensions offers valuable insights for wider ethical discussions about the future of armed conflict. Psychological profiles. The psychological makeup of exceptional snipers reveals surprising commonalities across different eras, cultures, and conflicts. Military psychologists studying these patterns have identified distinctive traits that appear consistently among those who excel in this specialized discipline, characteristics that both enable operational effectiveness and help manage the unique stresses the role imposes. Contrary to popular portrayals, successful snipers rarely display aggressive personality types. Instead, assessment data consistently reveals strong introversion, unusual emotional stability, and above-average intelligence. These traits create the foundation for the extended isolation and independent decision-making the role requires. As one psychological assessment from the U.S. Marine Corps Scout Sniper School noted, the ideal candidate often appears unremarkable in conventional social settings, but demonstrates exceptional self-sufficiency when operating independently. Patience emerges as perhaps the most distinctive psychological trait across sniper populations. This manifests not merely as tolerance for inactivity, but as positive engagement with stillness, the capacity to maintain alert attention during extended periods without external stimulation. Neurological research suggests this ability correlates with distinctive patterns in prefrontal cortex activity, particularly in regions associated with impulse control and attention regulation. "We're selecting for a paradoxical combination," explained a military psychologist involved in special operations assessment. We need individuals capable of absolute stillness who can transition instantly to precise action without an activation period. Most humans require some form of warm-up between passive and active states, but exceptional snipers appear to switch between these modes without intermediate phases. Emotional compartmentalization, the ability to separate feelings from functional requirements, appears consistently across successful sniper populations. This trait enables the psychological distance necessary for operational effectiveness, while potentially providing some protection against post-traumatic stress. However, this same compartmentalization sometimes creates challenges during reintegration to civilian environments where emotional responsiveness holds greater social value. Cognitive flexibility, particularly the ability to continuously recalculate complex variables under pressure, distinguishes top-tier snipers from merely competent marksmen. This mental agility manifests in rapid adaptation to changing environmental conditions, intuitive ballistic calculations, and exceptional working memory capacity. Neuropsychological assessments of elite snipers frequently reveal performance 2 standard deviations above population norms in spatial reasoning and mathematical estimation tasks. Field studies reveal distinctive attentional patterns among experienced snipers, where novices typically demonstrate narrow focus on potential targets. Veterans develop what researchers term distributed awareness, simultaneously monitoring multiple environmental zones while maintaining primary engagement with the objective. This parallel processing capacity significantly enhances both survival prospects and operational effectiveness. They're seeing everything while appearing to focus on one thing, observed a tracking instructor who works with military and law enforcement snipers. A veteran can tell you how many birds moved through their peripheral vision during an hour-long observation while maintaining perfect awareness of the primary target zone. This isn't trained as much as selected for. We find people whose brains already process information this way. The ethical decision architecture of successful snipers typically features highly developed personal frameworks that provide clear boundaries for action. Rather than relying exclusively on external authorization, experienced precision marksmen internalize comprehensive guidelines that enable rapid, confident decision-making under ambiguous conditions. This moral clarity appears to provide significant psychological protection during post-deployment adjustment. Perhaps surprisingly, empathy scores among successful snipers often register above military averages on psychological assessments. This apparent contradiction, high empathy, combined with lethal specialization, may explain the nuanced target discrimination many veteran snipers describe. As one instructor explained, understanding others as complete humans doesn't prevent necessary action, but it does prevent unnecessary action. The best snipers kill when required, not when merely permitted. Long-term psychological studies of career snipers reveal distinctive retirement patterns. Many gravitate toward occupations featuring similar psychological demands: wildlife photography, precision mechanical work, air traffic control, suggesting that certain cognitive architectures find satisfaction in the specific combination of sustained attention, technical precision, and consequential decision-making that defined their military specialization. The psychological profile of the exceptional sniper thus represents a specialized human adaptation to unique operational demands, a constellation of cognitive and emotional traits that enable both tactical effectiveness and psychological sustainability in a role defined by isolation, precision, and direct moral responsibility. Understanding these patterns provides valuable insights not only for military selection and training, but for broader comprehension of how humans navigate extreme ethical and psychological demands. Technological horizons. The evolution of sniper technology continues accelerating beyond the mechanical improvements that characterize previous generations of development. Where historical advances focused primarily on incremental refinements to existing systems, better optics, more consistent ammunition, improved stock designs, contemporary innovation increasingly integrates digital technologies that fundamentally transform the relationship between marksman and equipment. Computer-assisted targeting systems represent perhaps the most significant frontier in precision shooting development. These integrated platforms combine environmental sensors, ballistic calculators, and automated sight adjustment to simplify what previously required years of experience and intuitive judgment. Systems like tracking points, precision-guided firearms can maintain continuous ballistic solutions that account for temperature, pressure, weapon orientation, and target movement in real time. "We're approaching a paradigm shift," explained a military technology analyst specializing in small arms development. Traditional sniping balanced art and science, the science of ballistics with the art of environmental reading. These new systems increasingly handle the science portion, potentially changing the fundamental skill set required for effective employment. The ethical implications of this transition generate significant debate within military and policy communities. As targeting becomes increasingly automated, questions arise about meaningful human control and moral responsibility. Where traditional snipers maintained full agency throughout the engagement process, new systems potentially distribute decision-making between human operators and algorithmic processes, creating novel questions about accountability and judgment. Ammunition technology continues advancing in parallel with targeting systems. Precision-guided projectiles like Raytheon's Pike round incorporate miniaturized guidance packages that allow in-flight course correction, potentially extending effective ranges beyond what conventional ballistics permit. These smart bullets represent the logical conclusion of centuries of attempts to overcome environmental variables through technological means. Energy weapons represent another horizon technology, with potential applications for precision engagement. Directed energy systems offer theoretical advantages, including elimination of ballistic drop, instantaneous time to target, regardless of distance, and reduced collateral damage potential. While current power requirements and atmospheric interference limit practical deployment, research continues advancing toward potential field applications within the coming decade. Sensor integration increasingly extends the sniper's awareness beyond traditional visual observation. Modern precision marksmen often deploy with comprehensive sensor packages including thermal imaging, acoustic detection arrays, and atmospheric monitoring equipment. This expanded information environment enables more informed decision-making while potentially creating cognitive challenges through data saturation. The modern sniper is becoming a sensor hub operator as much as a shooter, noted an instructor at the U.S. Army Sniper School. "We're training them to integrate and prioritize multiple information streams while maintaining primary focus on the operational objective. It's a fundamentally different cognitive task than what previous generations performed." Artificial intelligence applications increasingly supplement human judgment in target identification and threat assessment. Machine learning algorithms trained on vast image databases can help distinguish combatants from civilians based on subtle behavioral patterns, potentially reducing misidentification risks in complex environments. However, these systems raise significant questions about algorithmic bias and appropriate trust calibration between human operators and automated recommendations. Counter-sniper technologies evolve in tandem with sniper capabilities, creating a technological arms race that shapes tactical employment. Advanced acoustic detection systems can triangulate shots with extreme precision, while thermal and optical sensing technologies increasingly penetrate traditional concealment methods. These developments force adaptation toward more sophisticated fieldcraft and altered engagement patterns. Networked operations represent another significant evolution, connecting individual snipers to broader battlefield awareness systems. Where historical precision marksmen operated with substantial autonomy, modern practitioners often function within integrated digital networks that provide real-time intelligence sharing, command guidance, and coordination with other assets. This connectivity enhances operational effectiveness, while potentially constraining the independence that characterized traditional sniper employment. Despite these technological advances, military trainers emphasize that fundamental human judgment remains irreplaceable. As one veteran instructor observed, "The technology can tell you that a shot is physically possible. It cannot tell you whether that shot is necessary or appropriate." That determination remains an essentially human calculation involving factors no algorithm can fully process. The future sniper thus emerges as a hybrid operator leveraging technological augmentation while maintaining the core human capacities for contextual judgment, ethical decision-making, and psychological resilience that have defined the discipline since its inception. This integration of traditional skills with emerging technologies points toward an evolution rather than replacement of the sniper's essential role in modern conflict. Enduring legacy. The sniper's place in military history reflects a singular paradoxal role, simultaneously celebrated for its effectiveness, yet often regarded with ambivalence even within martial cultures that otherwise valorize combat prowess. This distinctive position reveals deeper tensions in how societies conceptualize legitimate violence and individual agency in warfare. Unlike collective military endeavors where responsibility diffuses across units and command structures, precision shooting places both tactical effectiveness and moral weight squarely on individuals. This concentration of agency creates what military sociologists term responsibility compression, the collapse of institutional distance between decision and consequence that typically characterizes modern warfare. Through this compression, the sniper embodies both the necessity and the burden of lethal force applied with full awareness. "They carry what others distribute," observed a military chaplain who counseled snipers returning from combat deployments. Most modern warfare creates institutional and psychological distance between action and outcome. The sniper's role eliminates those buffers, creating both tactical advantage and potential psychological vulnerability. The enduring fascination with exceptional marksmen transcends military interest to permeate broader cultural awareness. From Ukrainian postage stamps honoring contemporary snipers to Hollywood dramatizations of historical figures, these specialists occupy distinctive cultural territory. This attention reflects not merely tactical impact, but deeper recognition of the unique psychological space these practitioners inhabit, the capacity to make life or death decisions from positions of relative safety yet complete personal responsibility. Military historians note that despite technological evolution, the core attributes that defined legendary snipers across different eras remain remarkably consistent. Patience, self-discipline, environmental awareness, and ethical clarity characterize exceptional practitioners regardless of whether they operated with flintlock rifles on Revolutionary War battlefields or with computerized targeting systems in modern conflict zones. This consistency suggests that beyond equipment and technique lies a distinctive human adaptation to specialized tactical requirements. The methodological approach, pioneered by military snipers, increasingly influences law enforcement and civilian protection operations worldwide. Police tactical units adopt modified versions of military sniper doctrine for hostage scenarios and critical incident response. This crossover application demonstrates how principles developed for battlefield employment translate effectively to non-military contexts, where precision application of force under stringent ethical constraints remains paramount. Educational institutions increasingly recognize the sophisticated cognitive demands of precision shooting as worthy of academic study. Ballistics research, environmental physics, human performance optimization, and ethical decision-making frameworks developed within sniper communities now appear in academic curricula across disciplines ranging from applied mathematics to moral philosophy. This academic integration legitimizes knowledge traditionally developed through practical experience rather than formal theory. Perhaps most significantly, the sniper's approach to operating effectively under extreme constraint offers valuable insights beyond military applications. The capacity to maintain focus despite discomfort, to make consequential decisions without complete information, and to accept full responsibility for actions rather than diffusing accountability, these attributes translate meaningfully to numerous high-stakes professional contexts from emergency medicine to crisis management. "The discipline teaches you to own your decisions completely," explained a former military marksman who now trains corporate executives in decision-making methodologies. "There's no deferring responsibility, no blaming circumstances. You either made the right call with the information available or you didn't." That framework for accountability translates powerfully to any leadership context. As warfare continues evolving toward more precise application of force with greater emphasis on minimizing civilian casualties, the sniper's historical balancing of effectiveness and restraint offers instructive precedent. The marksman who can neutralize specific threats while minimizing collateral damage represents an early manifestation of principles now considered essential to legitimate military operations under contemporary ethical and legal frameworks. The stories collected in this history, from Francis Pagamagabo stalking the Western Front to Chris Kyle protecting convoy routes in RAMADI, ultimately represent not merely exceptional individual achievement but the evolution of a specialized human adaptation to warfare's demanding requirements. These practitioners developed physical skills, psychological attributes, and ethical frameworks that enabled them to operate effectively in the uniquely isolated space between tactical necessity and moral consequence. In this capacity, they embody both the precision and the burden of warfare reduced to its essential calculation, the deliberate application of lethal force for specific purpose, undertaken with full awareness and complete responsibility. Their legacy extends beyond tactical innovation or statistical achievement to include the more profound demonstration that even in warfare's moral complexity, individual human judgment remains both necessary and consequential. The female equation. The narrative of military sniping traditionally presents as exclusively masculine, yet this historical framing obscures the significant contributions of women throughout the discipline's evolution. Female precision marksmen have demonstrated exceptional effectiveness across multiple conflicts, often achieving results that equal or surpass their male counterparts despite institutional barriers and limited recognition. The most thoroughly documented examples emerged during World War II on the Eastern Front, where Soviet military necessity overcame gender constraints that restricted women's combat roles in other armies. LYUDMILA Pavlichenko, a history student at Kiev University when Germany invaded, volunteered for infantry service and rapidly distinguished herself as an exceptional marksman. By the time wounds removed her from frontline service in 1942, she had accumulated 309 confirmed kills, including 36 enemy snipers, in direct counter-sniper engagements. The female sniper brings different psychological attributes to the discipline, observed a Soviet sniper instructor in a recently declassified training document. Greater patience, finer motor control, and typically lower resting heart rates create physiological advantages in precision shooting. These observations, while reflecting the gender essentialist thinking of their era, nonetheless acknowledged the objective effectiveness female snipers demonstrated in combat operations. Pavlichenko's extraordinary success prompted the Soviet military to establish female-specific sniper training programs that ultimately produced over 2,000 women snipers during the war. Their combined effectiveness conservative estimates credit them with more than 12,000 enemy casualties, represented a significant force multiplier on the Eastern Front. Yet, despite this demonstrable impact, their contributions received minimal recognition in broader military histories until recent scholarly reassessments. Rosa Shanina exemplified this overlooked excellence. Deployed to the Third Belarusian Front in 1944, she accumulated 59 confirmed kills in less than a year of service before dying in combat at age 20. Her diary, preserved in Russian military archives, reveals sophisticated tactical thinking that anticipated modern sniper doctrine. The key is not finding somewhere to hide, but becoming something they don't think to look for. Beyond the Soviet examples, female snipers operated effectively in various resistance movements throughout occupied Europe, particularly in Yugoslavia and France. These partisan fighters leveraged gendered assumptions about non-combatants to create tactical advantages. Their ability to move through checkpoints without raising suspicion enabled precision strikes against occupation forces under circumstances where male counterparts would have faced immediate detention. The post-war period saw most military establishments reinstate gender restrictions that prevented women from serving in direct combat roles, including as snipers. This institutional barrier persisted despite the demonstrated effectiveness of female marksmen during wartime necessity. The resulting gap in documented female sniper achievements reflects policy constraints rather than capability limitations. Contemporary military integration has gradually reopened sniper roles to women across various national forces. In 2001, Canadian Army Captain Nicola Goddard became the first female sniper team commander, in NATO history during operations in Afghanistan, US. Military branches began accepting women into sniper training programs following combat exclusion policy changes in 2015, with the first female graduates emerging from the Army Sniper Course in 2021. Modern combat data remains insufficient for comprehensive gender-comparative analysis of sniper effectiveness. However, shooting sports and competitive marksmanship provide relevant performance metrics in controlled environments. Olympic and international precision rifle competitions show minimal performance gaps between elite male and female competitors, particularly in disciplines emphasizing accuracy over raw physical power. The fundamentals of accuracy transcend physical strength, explained a US marksmanship team coach who has trained both male and female competitive shooters. Breath control, trigger discipline, and mental focus matter far more than upper body strength in precision shooting. The physiological differences that create performance gaps in some sports simply aren't relevant to this discipline. Neurological research suggests potential cognitive differences that might influence sniper performance across genders. Studies indicate that women typically demonstrate advantages in fine motor control, sustained attention to detail, and peripheral awareness, all attributes with direct application to precision shooting. Meanwhile, testosterone-influenced traits like aggression and risk-taking, often advantageous in direct combat roles, can actually impede the patient observation essential to sniper operations. The distinctive challenges female snipers face extend beyond technical performance to psychological and cultural dimensions. Traditional gender expectations regarding lethal violence create additional cognitive burdens for women in sniper roles. LYUDMILA PAVLICHENKO described facing dual judgment during her 1,942 American tour, questioned both as a sniper by those uncomfortable with female combatants and as a woman by those who viewed her lethal effectiveness as somehow unfeminine. This tension between gender expectations and operational requirements persists in contemporary contexts. Female precision marksmen report navigating complex identity management alongside their tactical responsibilities, balancing institutional pressure to minimize gender distinctiveness against external expectations to justify their presence in traditionally masculine specializations. "You're never just a sniper," explained a female graduate of US Army sniper training. "You're always a female sniper, with all the additional scrutiny that designation carries. Every shot isn't just your shot, it's evidence for or against the broader argument about women in combat roles." As military establishments continue integrating women into combat specializations, the historical contributions of female snipers provide important context for contemporary discussions. Their demonstrated effectiveness challenges essentialist assumptions about combat capabilities, while highlighting how institutional barriers, rather than performance limitations, have constrained women's participation in this specialized discipline. The female sniper thus represents not merely a footnote in military history, but a significant demonstration of how gendered assumptions about warfare have often obscured or marginalized effective contributors. As precision increasingly displaces mass force in modern conflict, the attributes that enabled women like Pavlichenko and Shanina to excel despite institutional constraints may prove increasingly central to the discipline's future evolution.